Welcome back to the Liberty Perspective. I'm Joe Marshall. I want to continue today with this show. I want to continue going over how our property rights, fundamental property rights that are fundamental to the free society, fundamental to our founding principles, and fundamental to the individual rights and liberties secured in our Constitution, in the right of us being able to, even the ability for us to be able to pursue an independent happiness, is being compromised by an assault on our private property rights in general through the world socialism of human rights. There's a contestation, a confrontation between the individual rights and liberty of our founding and the world socialism of human rights. They cannot exist together. They're matter and antimatter. When they come together, they destroy each other, or one destroys the other. And that's the whole idea behind human rights, is to target that what was referred to at one time the dominant society of America as founded is no longer dominant. The dominant society is the collectivist United States, where that liberty and those individual rights and liberty have no voice. Right, left, Republican, and Democrat, it has no voice. And but they have a voice here on the Liberty Perspective. That's why I started doing the show. And I want to continue pointing out the threats that are coming from the progressive movement at large, disguised as a medical freedom movement. And I did a couple shows. I've been doing on several of my shows since the beginning. I was doing shows on property, surrounding our right to property, which is, as Noah Webster put it, the fountain from which the stream of liberty flows. If all of our rights that you have, say, freedom of the press and the First Amendment rights that are out there, they're the stream. But only with the right to property are we obliged to, are we open to be able to drink from the fountain from which the stream of liberty flows, and that's property rights. I kind of went over that a little bit in one of my last couple shows, as far as Noah Webster and the essential part of he was a Federalist in his defense of the Constitution in 1787, I believe. But I want to get back into where we left off, kind of, after we went over with Dr. David Martin and his assault on property through WIPO, which is the World Intellectual Property Organization, and a lot of these things through the sciences are coming into how science is defined, how science is being centralized, the Human Genome Project being instrumental in the assault and the open assault and the populism of the open assault on our property rights through intellectual property rights, patents and intangible property rights, copyrights, that kind of thing. But I want to continue that and show you where and how the human rights context of those patent rights is being woven into, being codified into human rights laws, being codified into how the world socialism of human rights is being codified into what a patent law is, national and international. Okay, and I just want to show you some of this, what we got here. And the Human Genome Project, like I said, is instrumental for a couple of different reasons, and we'll get into them as I go down through this information that I want to give to you. I got it out there for your consideration. I want to get it out there to you. And today is July 4th, 2025. I think it's our 249th anniversary. I think next year's the 250th anniversary of our Declaration of Independence, and this is why I think it's important today on this, Independence Day, to kind of go over some of these things, and you'll see that a lot of this collectivism is no different than the tyranny of the king from that we've once already declared our independence from. They're just reestablishing that same tyranny, there's no difference between the collectivism of a kingdom and the collectivism of a dictatorship and the collectivism of the world socialism of human rights, and a right to health, a right to science, a right to culture, whatever they want to put it, that creates what they term a fungible right out of aspects of our property. And the only way to kind of explain that really quick before I get into this, I don't want to get off on too many tangents because I got a lot of information to give you. But on these fungible rights, on how human rights breaks down our natural, unalienable individual rights and liberties secured in our Constitution versus the positive rights of government and human rights. Say you have a right to your house. We have a right to our house. Human rights recognize, or say they recognize, and even anarchist doctrine will recognize that you have a right in your property, in your house in which you live in. They'll tell you that it's too big or too small or whatever, according to whatever, but in some realm recognize some aspect of you being able to own your property that you live in. And property that can't be replaced by monetary value, but if you own property in an apartment housing, or you own property that you're renting out and you're making a profit on somebody else's right to that housing, then that's a fungible that can be replaced by financial, and they're not really going to recognize that right in the world socialism of human rights because they're not going to recognize that. They'll violate that right first before they violate the right to your own house. That's why they kind of set up a hierarchy of what rights or aspects of your rights that the world socialism of human rights will violate first. They're going to violate all of them, but which ones they'll violate first and hold off on some of the other ones. It's that kind of thing. I kind of went over that in one of my last couple of shows, but this is how they break it down and where they come up with this difference between fungible rights and what are rights that they're going to recognize more for you, But this comes from your genome. Okay, and they asked, this is your genome. How did patenting cause conflicts within the human genome project? And like I'm going to get into, I'm going to show you. The Human Genome Project was instrumental in initiating the populist movement by globalists or world socialists. And the United Nations, sustainable developments is through pushing through sustainable developments and the redistributive justice of human rights. This is where it became popular and what gave traction to the world socialism of human rights assault on our property rights through intellectual property rights, intangible property rights, patents, copyrights, or however you want to put it. There's still property rights. In the end, there's still property rights. And this assault on these intellectual property rights doesn't end, it only begins with the intellectual property rights. This is another thing I'm trying to get to you. Because they want to shut down the free exchange, they want to shut down free enterprise, they want to shut down free markets, and you can't have free markets without property rights. Because what's an act of doing business if it's not the exchange of property owned for property desired, whatever that service or product may be, or idea? You see what I'm saying? So, and there's a whole there's a whole philosophical difference between what the world socialism of human rights looks at as an intellectual property right and what our founding principles would look at as an intellectual property right. And from our founding principles perspective, a property right is fundamental. Again, as Noah Webster put it, the stream from which liberty flows is property, right? The fountain from which the stream of liberty flows, that's what property is. From the world socialism of human rights perspective, it's a right given to people by governments in a positive action to grant them a limited monopoly on their idea, but as long as it still benefits the greater majority or the common good taking prima facie or priority over whatever right the individual may say or claim to have on his idea or patent or copyright or whatever. This is why there's a confrontation, a tension. And I'm going to show you that. Not in my words, but in the words of the people pushing this shit. This is the difference. I'm showing you what the people pushing this shit and are advocating this shit are saying it is. Yeah, you're going to get a lot of these conservatives out there. Shannon Joy being prominent among them, who's giving platform to all these medical freedom progressives and anti-American progressives. She's told me time and time again, "Oh, Joe, you're getting into the weeds, and our individual rights and liberty are the same thing as human rights, and people don't want to get into the weeds on that." I don't know what it is. All these big platforms don't want to speak to their audience anything more above a 4th or 5th or 6th or 7th grade education. Oh, you can't talk to them like that. They can't handle that. I don't know. I don't think it's right. I got more respect for people listening and watching, trying to get information on things. I'm not going to speak to people or do this just to get ratings, because I got better things to do than ratings. You know what I mean? There's reason, there's purpose, and being able to defend your liberty, our founding republic. I think putting this information to help people who want to do those things to be able to do it stronger and have more meat, to be able to grab onto to help them in that effort. Because the more people that can come to help us defend America's founding principles, and the idea, if not America itself, defend the idea of what America was supposed to be, what our founding principles actually are. This is what I'm trying to do. And I'm sorry, I can't speak to you at a 4th or 5th or 6th or 7th grade level. And I wouldn't do that. Yeah, that's what these big shows do. You can't get into the weeds, People don't want to get in. I got more respect for you than that. I'm sorry. Despite the collaborative nature of the Human Genomes Project for the common good, right? It was not without its conflicts and disagreements, including some scientists trying to patent sections of the DNA sequence for their own financial gain. Yeah, this is where that push against property rights got its traction. Some scientists and companies involved in the Human Genome Project tried to patent sections of the DNA sequence for financial gain. Myriad Genetics patented 2 genes associated with breast cancer. Patenting conflicted with the Human Genomes Project collaborative ethos. Okay. And did you know that in 2013, the U.S. Supreme Court put a stop to patenting of the human genome on the grounds that the human DNA is a product of nature? This is the kind of messed up thing here, too, is that the product of nature. Yeah, they kick it back and forth. And a lot of these writings and papers that I'm talking about is that, okay, once they take that sequence and isolate it, once they isolate it, and how do they isolate it? I don't know. But wouldn't they isolate it through a recombinant DNA process? Wouldn't they isolate it by synthetic DNA and creating a lot of it? Copies of that, and then saying, this is the isolated sequence of that genome, or the sequence of that genome. You take that sequence, just like they did with COVID in the mud puddle, and they isolated that by the same recombinant DNA in the lab, and they said, this is the virology, this is the virus, this is the sequence of the virus. They can patent that. They can patent the isolated sequence. Sorry. They can patent the isolated sequence, but they can't patent the sequence in the mud puddle, or the natural sequence. Sorry about that. They can't patent the natural sequence. Well, isn't that saying that the sequence in the mud puddle is different than the sequence isolated? if you can patent one but not the other, maybe is that how they? I don't know. All kinds of questions come up, but this is what I'm getting at. This is just information for your consideration and to lead you to wherever it leads you to. But I think it's important to recognize that this shit's happening. That the Human Genome Project was essentially the launching pad to justify an assault on property rights. And it's easy to see why once we get into it a little bit here. I mean, of the 50 best-selling drugs in this country, and there's this article, I don't want to skip the title of it, Ethics in Gene Patenting. This is Santa Clara. And in this article, back from 2003, this is another important aspect of it, is that of the 50 best-selling drugs in this country, 48 benefited from public money. 48 out of 50 benefited from public money. Well, as you'll see as we get into this, there's been a big push from the World Socialism of Human Rights to push for more and more and more funding, for push for stronger government to be able to decipher what science is, what science isn't, different arms and agencies of the government, including our law and legal, and how they're pushing what is or what isn't science, and how sciences are influencing judges and lawyers and teachers in education, and what is or what isn't science. Okay? Yeah, I'm sorry. But anyways, in the case of genes, the public has certainly contributed to the knowledge base that is producing innovations through government funding of the Human Genome Project and other scientific endeavors. By that measure, the public is entitled to expect some access to the fruits of genetic research because this is the justification, because they were publicly funded, and it's publicly funded science. The public is entitled to expect some access to it, at least some access, if not complete and total access, where the human rights are going to hold the governments responsible to make that redistribution of the benefits of that science to the collective for the common good. That's what human rights do. They hold the governments responsible to do exactly that. Yeah. By that measure, the public is entitled to expect some access because it's getting funded by the government. Can the patent system be adjusted? Can the patent system be adjusted to spread the fruits more widely, to more redistributive justice? You know, the patent system is property system, is capitalist system, right? Free market system, right? Not without trade-offs, said June Carbone, presidential professor of ethics at the Common Good at Santa Clara. These public decisions, these public health decisions, if we all know what public health is from my last show, basically a codification of world socialism into healthcare is public health. These public health decisions have important implications for the common good. Physical well-being is not solely an individual matter. Holistic medicine takes on a whole new meaning when you're not talking about the body, but you're talking holistic medicine and a one health perspective and a human rights perspective. You see what I'm saying? For example, we all rely on the public provision of clean water and sewage systems to protect our health. No, not all of us. I have a well and septic system. It's private. It's mine. We handle serious infections, disease risk by offering vaccines to everyone because a policy that provided protection only for those who could afford it might eventually harm everyone. If we only gave vaccines to people who could afford it, how does that work when you're trying to do a herd immunity and you're also trying to push public? You're also trying to push what is that? Public responsibility theory, society theory, social contract theory is what they call it. You're trying to push that where you're saying you don't have a right to take that and to not take that vaccine. You don't have a right not to wear that mask. You don't have a right not to socialist distance, because you not complying with that direction is endangering the public at large. That's that social contract theory shit. So how are you going to do that if on the other hand, the only people you're giving the vaccine to is those who can afford it, because the people holding the patents need to make profits at the expense of the greater good of the collective. Do you see what I'm saying? Where this goes, where this is coming from? Gene patenting needs to be seen within this common good context. There it is, gene patenting, property rights. McLean argued, as if as a society we develop patent policies that direct research only to the development of expensive drugs, we may ultimately bankrupt the healthcare infrastructure on which we all rely. The resolution of all these ethical dilemmas is limited only by our moral imagination. The moral imagination of the planners. The moral imagination of the dictator. The moral imagination of the king or the prince or the slave owner. The moral imagination. You see what I'm getting at? And that moral in collectivism isn't the same moral check that we knew growing up from a spiritual aspect of doing to others as if you would have them doing to you, and you just don't do things. I mean, there's a moral check on what you do, but when the ends justify the means, the moral check is released for these planners. And the actual Kantian collectivist morality and collectivist doctrine is what is moral is the individual sacrificing himself at every opportunity to throw himself under the bus for the greater good of the collective. That's what's moral. That's what's moral. That's morality in collectivist doctrine. Same word, two different meanings. Opposite meanings, actually. Now, I got this other thing. Still looking into intellectual property rights aspect of the human genome connection, and I've got more of that coming. I'm looking into this doctrine here specifically, which is this: the intellectual property and human rights. This is from 1998. This document is a United Nations document from 1998. World Intellectual Property Organization. That's WIPO, right there, where Dr. David Martin was, doing speeches and stuff like that too, right? Intellectual property and human rights. I'm going to get into this a little bit more, but Human Genome Project is mentioned in here 21 times. The first being right here, just really quick, and I'll show you, is that. Just to kind of get in here, there's all this. Let me see. I just want to. All this gave importance to the Human Genome Project, which started in the United States in 1990 and has since been endorsed by large numbers of countries around the world. The main objective of the Human Genome Project is identification and approximately 80,000 genes that constitute the human DNA, and the working out of sequences of 3 billion chemical bases that form it. All this gave importance to the Human Genome Project. It says the inception of the Human Genome Project in 1988, a major international initiative to decode the human genome, accelerated the pace of genetic discoveries and raised anew the issues related to commercialization of biology. It has been described as the single most important project in biology and medical sciences, one that will permanently change biology and medicine. In 1991, well before any of the significant issues regarding intellectual property rights and or applications of the research and discoveries funded through the Human Genome Project were thoroughly debated, let alone resolved, NIH decided to file a patent application on 350 gene fragments that had been identified by one of its scientists. And wouldn't you know that it was a government agency that filed those patents, not an individual, right? So government filing patents, patent rights. Okay, of course, the individual scientists would have a right to a certain amount of money out of that, too, that were involved. They get their name on the patent, too. So they aren't going to say anything about it. They're going to get a little something out of it, right? Yeah. Well, I just wanted to kind of show you really quick. I'm going to be looking into this more on this. Here it is right here. It says, another major subject arises when the issues of relations between intellectual property and the right to health is introduced in bioethics. It is a subject that has also been seriously debated worldwide in connection with the possibility of using intellectual property to secure exclusive rights in human body parts. The debate came into the open, above all, with the implementation of the Human Genome Project. See what I'm saying? I'm going to be diving into this a little bit more and coming back. I think I might probably just do a show on this piece of paper itself, which comes from 1998, by the way. And the Human Genome Project is mentioned in that United Nations WIPO piece there. Document 21 times. 21 times the Human Genome Project is mentioned in that. The centralization of common good theme to the Human Genome Project, however, translates to the whole of science, not just bioethics or not just genetics or not just biology. And I got this United Nations piece here. This is the article from the United Nations. The impact of intellectual property regimes. It'd be like, societies that recognize property rights. Regimes that recognize individual effort and advancements on a market in an open and free market, right? Which gave us the 5,000-year leap, that free society and a free exchange of property and ideas based on a free exchange of property owned for property desired is what gave us that 5,000-year leap. Those are the property regimes they're talking about, the impact of intellectual property regimes on the enjoyment of the right to science and cultures. They're saying that is what's impeding on the right to science, on the right to culture, on the right to health, on a right to repair. You see what I'm saying? This is all the intellectual property rights that are out there that are being assaulted as if they were different, isolated efforts, but they're not. In this article from the United Nations, intellectual property is an umbrella term encompassing a number of distinct legal regimes, again, right? Regimes that create private property rights. Remember, at the beginning, I told you that they see private property rights as being different. Our founding principles, natural origin, unalienable, we owe no man. Human rights, legal regimes that create private property rights. So they're saying it's the governments, it's the regimes that create these rights. They don't recognize them as natural. And if they can give them, they can take them away. Governments can give them, they can take them away. That's why human rights hold governments responsible for the redistributive justice necessary in the world socialism of human rights to confiscate aspects that are obstructive to the common good collective use, to the right to health, right? To the right to repair, right? To the right to science, to the benefits of science for the collective. Yeah, so the intellectual property is an umbrella term encompassing a number of distinct legal regimes that create private property rights related to intangible assets. The 2015 report to the General Assembly continued the work on intellectual property, addressing the implications of patent policy for the human right to science and culture. The special reporter reaffirmed the distinction to be made between intellectual property rights and human rights. There is no right to patent protection. There is no human right to patent protection. There is no human right to patent protection. Unquote. Quote from the United Nations itself, there is no human right to patent protection. Unquote. I'm not making this shit up. That's no different than the United Nations saying that there is no such thing as a human right to self-defense, which I've also done shows on. How can you possibly have a human right to keep and bear arms if there's no such thing as a human right to self-defense? How can you possibly have a human right to life if you have no right to defend it, which would makes it so that if you have no right to defend it, you can't possibly have a right to the arms in which to defend it. Can you see the fundamental elements of that philosophy? This is why you've got the tied-up gun outside the United Nations. This is why you have guns and gun rights being thrown in with as a public health concern, a public health crisis, because now the right of the public and the government's being obligated through the World Socialism of Human Rights to protect the common good, the collective, from the dangers of guns, from the violence of guns. The public has a right to be protected from those guns that are violent and dangerous. You say you have a right to that gun. Once you say you have a human right to that gun, you've automatically lost it, because they're telling the public they have a right to be protected from that gun you say have a right to, because it's been deemed a public health emergency, a public health crisis, a public health concern, international concern. The right to protect protection of moral, remember, a collectivist moral, and material interests cannot be used to defend patent laws. The right to protection of moral and material interests cannot be used to defend patent laws that inadequately impact the right to participate in culture. So your right to culture, the public's right to culture is impacted. You cannot use the right to protection of a moral and material interest cannot be used to defend patent laws. To enjoy the benefits of scientific progress and its applications to scientific freedoms, as well as the rights to food and health and the rights of indigenous peoples and common and local communities. Now, they always throw these rights of indigenous peoples in there because they're blowing smoke up their ass. They're literally blowing smoke up freaking indigenous and native people's ass everywhere, where they'll recognize their knowledge, indigenous knowledge, tribal knowledge, as science. As a science. Well, a lot of indigenous peoples are spiritual peoples too. Part of the wisdom of indigenous cultures is in their spirituality, is in the spirituality aspect of it. But the world socialism that constitutes human rights doesn't recognize metaphysical, period. So just like they're blowing smoke up their ass, no different than they're blowing smoke up everybody else's ass about the dignity that human rights provide. We have to get to determine what is science, what isn't science, and just to throw these guys a bone, they'll frickin', to throw Indian peoples around the world a bone, they're going to frickin' say, well, we recognize your traditional wisdom as, science. Until we decide not to. as long as it benefits the planters. You know, a lot of native peoples, indigenous peoples are drinking the Kool-Aid, or they're totally on board with the anti-property rights, anti-capitalism rights, because they're in the context in the oppressor versus oppressed context of the Communist Manifesto, that they've been rolled into that line of thinking. They've adopted that line of thinking, as lately has the American public at large, left and right, kind of adopted the same collectivist mindset. So this is where we are. The special reporter recalls that when properly structured, patents may expand the options and well-being of all people by making new possibilities available. Yeah, that's consistent with how Obama was really good at that back when he was running for president. He would say a line, he would give a line, and he'd say, yeah, but. Okay, and then if you agree with him on the first half, then you must agree with him on the second half. But here's the same kind of yeah, but shit right here. Special reporter calls that when properly structured, patents may expand the option and well-being of all people to make the new possibilities available. Now, even in the Declaration of Human Rights, in an article, 27 or whatever it is that mentions this shit, they kind of say the same thing, you know. Yet, but they don't say but, they say yet. They also give patent holders the power to deny access to others, thereby limiting or denying the public's right to participation to the science and culture. See what I'm saying? Patent rights are denying the collective its human rights, which outweigh any individual's human right to anything. Individual human rights are just as collective as any other aspect of just as collective as any other aspect of collectivism. Yeah. Yet they also give patent holders the power to deny access to others, thereby limiting or denying the public's right to participation to the science and culture. The human rights perspective demands that patents do not extend so far as to interfere with individuals' dignity and well-being. To interfere with the individual's dignity and well-being? I mean, every individual of the collective. They're not talking about the individual rights and liberty. This is every individual in the collective at large for the public good. Where patent rights and human rights are in conflict, human rights must prevail. End of story. That comes from the United Nations, okay? There is no human right to patent protection. It's right there. I got this other thing on here I wanted to kind of show you because this is an offshoot on it, but another thing to kind of, just to throw a little bit of more information about what we're dealing with here. They put this Vienna Declaration of Program. This is from 1993, but, you know, it's this paper keeps showing up. It keeps showing up. As you read different white papers and stuff like this, different doctrine, man, they're constantly referring to this document here, Vienna Declaration and Program of Action, 1993. The World Conference on Human Rights reaffirms the solemn commitment of all states to fulfill their obligations to promote universal respect for and observance and protection of all human rights and fundamental freedoms for all, in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations. So, in other words, if the United States is signed on to this shit, first, priority are these human rights. Okay. It reaffirms the solemn commitment of all states to fulfill their obligations to promote universal respect for and observation and protection of all human rights and fundamental freedoms for all in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations, other instruments relating to human rights and international law. The universal nature of these rights, which means public good, common good, and freedoms is beyond question. The universal, The universal nature of these rights and freedoms is beyond question. That just means that the public, greater good, the collective. In this framework, enhancement of international cooperation in the field of human rights is essential for the full achievement of the purposes of the United Nations. Human rights and fundamental freedoms are the birthright of all human beings. Their protection and promotion is the first responsibility of governments. The first responsibility. Not the Constitution. In our case, it would be the Constitution binding our government from having the power to do everything that the world socialism of these human rights is mandating that it has the power to do. Can you see the conflict? Shannon Joy doesn't. And the reason why I say that is because she used to be a champion of individual rights and liberty, or claimed to be. So I don't know. But anyways, that's a little bit of what we're dealing with. A little bit more of an understanding on what we're dealing with and where these people are coming from. We got intellectual property and human rights. This is the other thing. This is the tension or conflicting premise in between intellectual property and human rights. This is it. The ball is rolling since the Human Genome Project, with a justification because these patents being put on the human genome sequences by the government, by the NIH first, right? So now they're going to go against the patent rights of everybody because the government put a patent in them first. So intellectual property and human rights. This is this article here. WIPO, World Intellectual Property Organization. This is that Dr. David Martin was a big speaker at these and everything. Yeah. The proceedings of a panel discussion organized by the World Intellectual Property Organization in collaboration with the offices of the United Nations High Commission for Human Rights on November 9th, 1998, to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the proclamation of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This is that same paper that that I was looking at up top, just a different link to it. But I saw this is kind of interesting in there. It says the component that lends DNA its informative property may be described as a lateral protrusion of each of the chains of the double helix. If the sequential dynamic of one of these chains is not known, so they're saying, well, they know what this chain says, and they automatically know what the other chain says. I don't know. It may immediately be deduced from the complementary chain. It just stuck out to me, so I thought I'd put it there for your consideration. Okay, here's an article that came out in 1999 too. This is this isn't anything new. This is the other thing that I'm trying to point out here. Although there's been a resurgence recently in politics, Of course, I didn't see any defense of any of these coming out of the medical freedom movement. You know what I mean? Matter of fact, people before profits, right? Wasn't that the message that was coming out of the Children's Health Defense? The human rights perspective of intellectual property, scientific progress, and access to the benefits of science. This is another one of those articles that keeps showing up and keeps being referenced over and over again. And when I start reading a lot of the paperwork on this world socialist assault against property rights. Okay, this is on University of UConn. This is that article here. Introduction. Intellectual property regimes, again, right, seek to balance. There's this that slave speak work balance the moral, collectivist moral, and economic, capitalist, rights of creators and inventors. So you got the intellectual property regimes that seek to balance the moral and economic rights of creators and inventors with the wider interests and needs of society. It's nothing new. I'm not saying this shit, they are. The people pushing this shit, the people advocating this shit. A major justification for patents and copyrights is that incentives and rewards to inventors result in the benefits for society. The United States Constitution, this part here, remember Dr. David Martin said the same shit essentially, except with one twist, where Dr. Martin says that intellectual or intangible property rights are the only rights guaranteed to us or given to us by the Constitution. Only rights given to us by the Constitution. She's saying that the United States Constitution, written in 1787, for example, vests the Congress with the power to promote the progress in science of useful arts by securing, for a limited time, to the authors and inventors the exclusive right to their respectful writings and discoveries. That's the difference. Yeah, the Constitution secures our rights and liberties. Doesn't give us jack shit, because the Constitution and the government itself are products of the people's liberty. Why would we need to have a product of our liberty give us liberty? It's impossible. 200 years later, the World Intellectual Property Organization, thank God for WIPO, links the existence of an equitable and modernized patent system, a modernized and equitable patent system. You can change patent for property rights. The existence of an equitable and modernized property rights system to incentives for inventiveness and innovative activity, a willingness to invest in industrial applications, and a favorable climate to the transfer of technology, the redistribution of it for public access and access for the public good, because of the public's right to health, the public's right to culture, public's right to repair. You see what I'm saying? A human rights approach to intellectual property takes what is often an implicit balance. There's that frickin' balance shit, that dialectal shit that they're trying to get you to throw half your property rights away. Come on, let's compromise. Yeah, a human rights approach to intellectual property takes what is often an implicit balance between the rights of inventors and creators. Notice, not owners of that property. Within the It is often an implicit balance between the rights of inventors and creators and the interests of the wider society within intellectual property paradigms, and makes it far more explicit and exacting. So, a human rights approach to intellectual property takes what is often an implicit balance between the rights of inventors and creators and the interests of the wider society within intellectual property paradigms, and makes it far more explicit and exacting. Right, so you can't wiggle out. The International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, the ICESCR, which we will just say that probably from here on out in this article. The link, I added this link to it wasn't original, but that was a 1967 article, which again is referred to multiple times in these articles as I was reading through. This International Covenant on Economic and Social and Cultural Rights, because the public, the collective has a right to economic, an adequate standard of living, a redistributive justice. So it has a public right, a common good collective right to their social and cultural rights, and to science, and to health, and to right to repair, right? It's the major international human rights instrument that are addressing these issues. Article 15, which is commonly referred to over and over and over again in all these freaking intellectuals all talking about, all these academics kicking the shit around. Article 15, Article 15, Article 15. But this specifies that state parties, that is, the countries that have ratified or acceded to this instrument, recognize the right of everyone to enjoy the benefits of science progress and its applications, and to benefit from the protection of the moral and material interests resulting from any scientific, literacy, or artistic production of which he is the author. Again, notice that there's no protection of the owner of that property right. Are they not recognizing that, because we have a right to sell our property? It's the free exchange of property owned for property desired. That's what a free market is. Are they saying that intellectual property rights are unsellable? They're non-exchangeable? Just like in prison with all the inmates, they're not allowed to exchange any private property. Is this one of the first? Is this the private property right here? Property right that they're telling us we don't have the right to exchange to? Are they going to give us a ticket like we give the inmates in prison when they have an unlawful exchange? That we have to write a slug on them? Are we going to have slugs wrote up on us when we get caught for unlawful exchange of property because we're not allowed to exchange our property? I don't know. A lot of places that could go to. I'm just pointing this out for your consideration. All part of the same world socialism of human rights. All part of the same shit. It's literally a prison. They're trying to make the whole of our society exactly what it is for the people in prison. It's the same shit, Human rights are prisoners' rights. The right to exchange property, is all constricted and restricted. It's the same shit. Okay, and regarding this economic, social, and cultural rights, what are they? Kind of through this collectivist doctrine, this human rights doctrine, we constantly refer to these. So it's just to give you an idea what they are from Amnesty International. So these, just so that we're on the same page, Amnesty International promotes the upholding of economic, social, and cultural rights, sometimes referred to as ESC rights, not ESG, but ESC. Okay. These rights are protected under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. ESC rights include protections for the basic things we need to live, just like in prison: food, water, sanitation, health, housing, Social Security. Social Security, while in prison, they have a right to. They have that right to a job in prison, but they call it a right to. They call it a program. In prison, you're assigned a program, which you are entitled to. If you don't have a job, you're entitled to what they refer to as idle pay. As long as you don't refuse a job. In between jobs, they give you an idle pay, like a minimum idle pay. Okay, same shit. Okay. ESC rights include protections of the basic human rights: food, water, sanitation, health, housing, and Social Security. And a right to recreation too, by the way. It also covers things that we need to live a dignified life, like education, workers' rights, and rights affected by ongoing climate crisis. There you go. I did a whole show on adverse childhood events, ACEs they call it, and how they tie all the psychologists and everything are all drinking the frickin' Kool-Aid on this frickin' adverse events. Of course, minorities, oppressed people, or whatever, disadvantaged, in the context of the oppressor versus oppressed context of the Communist Manifesto. That's what the accusatory is. So you have all that adverse childhood events all being tied into, of course, and how climate change affects that, and how disadvantaged and are all being affected. The disparities between how minorities and the oppressed are being affected by climate change than white people are, or whatever. race hustlers are eating this shit up, making a lot of money out there, right? Yeah. So all ESC rights can intersect. All ESC rights, okay, science and culture rights, can intersect with and impact each other, of course, because there's intersectionality, right? Gross economic and social inequality is an enduring reality in countries of all levels of development. Governments around the world have obligations to guarantee ESC rights, and Amnesty International holds them to account to respect, protect, and fulfill these rights. When governments implement austerity, this can have deeply adverse effects on human rights. Yeah, because austerity is the human rights or redistributive justice come from programs and this and that people are entitled to. Government spending, government growth is necessary, and strong governments are needed to provide these things, which takes more money. And when governments implement austerity, it means you're going to hold back on that, maybe try and pay some bills and catch up on your bills. They see that as these things that they're cutting back on, and budgetary cuts or whatever, is that they've come to understand these things, these programs, these rights that are provided, food, shelter, water, all these rights of prisoners that are being provided. Can you imagine if you cut the prisoners off in jail, the inmates in prison, and cut them off of all these things? They'd riot, right? Well, they do the same shit in Europe and all them and every place else. When you hear the word austerity, they all freak out and they start burning their own places down, because they're in protest that you can't hold back these rights. These are our birthright. We've got these things coming. And this is the collectivist mind. This is the mindset, the collectivist mindset trap off. That's anybody who's into this world socialism, this whole collectivist thing. You know, they see these programs, these redistributive justice things, these positive rights as their birthright. You know, where our founding principles see that our the only thing that we have as a birthright is our natural individual rights and liberty endowed to us by our Creator, be it nature or nature's God, to which we are indebted to no man for. But they've got themselves caught in that vortex, which they're going to demand the rights, that demand the confiscation of their property, that demand their conformity, and demand that they comply and surrender and do the moral thing and throw themselves under the bus for the collective. But this is what they're talking about here. Austerity. Going back to the article that we were talking about here, going back to this article by Audrey Chapman, The Human Rights Perspective on Intellectual Property, Scientific Progress, and Access to the Benefits of Science. This is what we're talking about here. We're talking about how our right to property is conflicting with human rights, and how the world socialism of human rights is pushing back and assaulting. It's a full-blown deconstruction of America's founding principles, America's founding republic, and the free society that it ordained, and our government, a limited government, securing these rights for so that our society can be the result of a free and enterprising people. We'll get back to that article. To be consistent with the norms in the ICESCR, okay, the Science and Cultural Rights, a human rights approach differs in a number of regards from standards set by intellectual property law. Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. They're in conflict with them. In brief, it requires that the type and level of protection afforded under any intellectual property regime directly capitalism, capitalist societies, individualist societies, directly facilitate and promote scientific progress, progressives, and its applications, and do so in a manner that will broadly benefit members of society on an individual as well as collective level. That individual is just thrown in there, so I don't know. That's gaslighting shit right there, because the individual right don't mean jack shit. All individual rights are collective rights and human rights. There's no such thing as an individual human right that's not a collective right. That is not premised. That is not issued as a collective right. Even individual human rights are collective rights. They're to benefit you. You can have them only so long as they benefit the collective and the needs of the planners. That's the difference. Yeah. Yep. In brief, it requires that the type and level of protection afforded under any intellectual property regime directly facilitate and promote scientific progress and its applications, and do so in a manner that will broadly benefit members of society on an individual as well as collective level, and establishes a higher standard for evaluating patent applications. Going to make it harder. Namely, that the proposed invention also be consistent with the inherent dignity of the human personhood, and with central human rights norms. Central human rights norms, also consistent with the inherent dignity of the human person. Here's where we get into personhood. You got to remember, in the collectivism and world socialism of human rights, there can be no and is no intrinsic utility of that collectivism. There is no intrinsic value and can be no intrinsic value for any human life, for any individual. Your value is only determined by that value which you add to the collective. You have a personhood, and even our Constitution, protects persons in social contract theory. You can have your personhood removed. Britney Spears had her personhood removed. I mean, she wasn't able to make her own decisions for whatever reason. I forget what they call it. So I can't remember the word that they call it offhand. But Dred Scott, a progressive court decision where Dred Scott was deprived his personhood because he was black in a hostile interpretation of our Constitution. Roe v. Wade, the progressive court, the progressive decision, withheld or withdrew or removed the personhood status of an unborn child. Right? Because they were unborn. Internment camps, progressive courts with hostile interpretations of the Constitution justified the imprisonment and internment of Japanese and German Americans. Removed their personhood status because, again, if they had their persons, the Constitution would have protected them. All they got to do is remove our personhood. I mean, you don't take your vaccine. You don't take the vaccine. Will they take your personhood? That's all they got to do. That's all they got to do. The human person. Does that mean the human organism? Is that what the person is? The global human organism? I don't know. Either way. They must also be consistent with the inherent dignity of the human person and with central human rights norms, because human rights is a universal entitlement, meaning universal, it's for the collective, for the greater good, for the common good. Every individual in the common good. Not the individual person, you, but everybody else. And the moral thing is that you would throw yourself under the bus for the greater good of the collective anyway. Yeah. Because a human right is a universal entitlement, its implementation should be measured partially by the degree to which it benefits those who hitherto have been the most disadvantaged and vulnerable. Of course, because the redistributive justice in the world socialism of human rights is also embedded or codified. The oppressor versus oppressed context of the Communist Manifesto is embedded and codified into that. It's all in the same context. The oppressor versus oppressed context of the Communist Manifesto, and this is the same shit. Disadvantaged, the oppressed, marginalized, whatever, right? A right to the benefits of science and technology assumes that both individuals and communities will have easy access. Additionally, a right to the benefits of science and technology cannot be achieved in the absence of careful government policies to determine priorities for investment in and the development of science. Did you catch that? A right to the benefits of science and technology cannot be achieved in the absence of careful government policies, a big government, to determine priorities for investment and in development of science. What science? What percentage of science is being funded by government? What of the universities and scientists out there for whatever siloed aspect of science or specialized aspect of science that they're looking for, is they got to apply for a grant, and to get the grant they got to show that they're drinking the Kool-Aid, so that they'll write in the grant that they show that they're drinking the Kool-Aid, and then they write the paper, and in the abstract of the paper they show in the abstract of the paper, look, I'm drinking the frickin' Kool-Aid on whatever you wanted me to do to get the grant, so here's the paper in the context of the Kool-Aid you wanted me to prove that I was drinking. That's what it is. The human rights principle that every citizen shall have the right and opportunity to take part in conduct of public affairs mandates a right of choice for the members of society. I threw in there and read a human right because that's what they're talking about. The human rights principle of every citizen, that every citizen shall have the right and opportunity to take part in the conduct of human and public affairs, mandates a human right of choice for members of society. And I got something to point out there on that, which is down here. Okay, note that the right of choice and the protection of harmful effects at the forefront of the so-called medical freedom movement is wholly consistent with the world socialism of human rights. Because that's what are we getting out of the medical freedom movement? Oh, right to choose. You got a right to choose, man. We want a right to choose. We want to be able to choose the vaccine. We want a right to choose these vaccines. We want a right to choose these things that are being mandated. But you can see here that this right to choose, okay, this whole right to choose, this notion of right to choose is wholly consistent and within the confines of the world socialism of human rights. It's not a fight against them. It's not from outside the box. It's not from the perspective of our founding principles. It's from within the confines of the world socialism of the human rights that the medical freedom movement has bullshitted everybody into thinking that that's what they were fighting for. And anybody who's questioning it is being told, oh, Joe, you're just getting into the semantics. I think I'm the only one that's questioned it. Oh, well, I'm not the only one that's questioned it. There are a couple people out there. And honestly, the only two people that I hear questioning it at all, really, are Jonathan Cooey, Dr. Jonathan Cooey at GigaOhm Biological, and Mark Kulak at Housatonic. They're the only two. It's just, it is what it is. I mean, I'm doing my thing, they're doing their thing, but in the end, they're pushing back against what these people are doing. And I think Jonathan Cooey is right in that they represent a Trojan horse. It can't be put any better than that. I'm just giving you reasons why, where I'm coming from, as to why they're a Trojan horse. Cooey's showing you the biological reasons why they're a Trojan horse. And Mark Kulak's documenting the history and how all these people have been working together to put this Trojan horse together. I think we're kind of I think we see the same alien. I don't think it's a coincidence that all the same people on my radar are the same people on their radar, and that's I'll just leave it at that. And you know, they're the only two. Anyways, I just said this. The human right principle that every citizen shall have the right and opportunity to take part in the conduct of public affairs mandates a right of choice for members of society to be able to discuss, assess, and to have a role to determine major scientific and technological developments. And finally, a human rights approach entails a right of protection from possible human effects, because of the scientists that made the bomb, remember, and the Nazis. Of scientific and technological development, again, on both individual and collective levels. These considerations go well beyond a simple economic calculus. They go well beyond capitalism. Large government investments in basic research and development made it possible. Remember, I told you the Human Genome Project got the ball rolling and gave traction to the world socialist assault via the world socialism of human rights, the world collectivism of human rights, is what gave traction to this assault on our property rights. Large government investments. The Human Genome Project was funded, as the vast majority of our science today, unless it's coming from their public-private partnerships in the private sector, which again are public-private partnerships. It's all the same. It's all the same fascist beast, right? Because that's what fascism is, at least according to Mussolini, right? Public-private partnerships. Large government investments in basic research and development made it possible to argue that the conduct of scientific research, including the maintenance and distribution of scientific data, was a public good. Did you hear that, P? It's right there. I'm going to read it again. Large investments in basic research and development made it possible to argue that the conduct of scientific research, including the maintenance and distribution of scientific data, was a public good. And then with that, the revolutionary collectivist trap had been set. It is set. Research scientists actively... our Constitution is a binding document. It's a binding document with a limited enumerated list of powers that the government was ordained to have through the Constitution. And this is why all this public funding that will mandate that the world socialism of human rights will mandate is a public good. Therefore, having to obtain extra constitutional powers to be able to live up to its obligations that the world socialism of human rights is holding our government to. Yet, there are still some conservatives out there who say that our natural individual rights and liberty and our constitutional republic and founding principles are the same as human rights. They're the same. We don't want to, get into the weeds on that because I can't talk to people. My can't talk to my audience above a 7th grade level, Joe. I'll lose them. And I'll lose my I don't know what the rationality is. But there's nobody on social media that's going to break that down. Nobody with any audience. Nobody that I've seen anyway. Audience or no audience. Other than me. So if you're stumbled on this channel and you're listening to this, It's one of the only places, if not the only place left, that's still deciphering the difference between the collectivism and the world socialism of human rights and our founding principles. Putting it out there for you to consider. That's what I'm trying to do. Okay, enter the conflict of implicit collectivism with the individualism of private property rights and capitalism, aka globalization, aka the detested neoliberalism of the Reagan era, right? However, an evolution of government policy beginning in 1980 with the adoption of the Bayh-Dole Act, I'm not really sure, inclined many governments to encourage the private commercial development of publicly funded research. That was about 10 years before the Human Genome Project. Consequently, many of these countries also began to privatize activities previously delivered by the public sector and to facilitate the generation and distribution of scientific data, on a commercial basis. This development in turn stimulated pressure for the new and broader forms of intellectual property rights to protect economic investments. So now you've got these progressives, you've got these academic progressives, these world socialist progressives that are out there now claiming to be the conservatives who are protecting the progressive progress that's been made towards the world socialism of human rights, now saying that things are being reversed back to a more capitalistic, individualistic, intellectual property protecting regimes. When our founding principles, our country was founded on that individualism, and then the world socialism of human rights came along to try and destroy that, has targeted it for destruction, and they're trying to say that it's the reverse of that. They're claiming to be the conservatives of progressive progress. This is one of the reasons why Hayek said that he wasn't a conservative, because what is conservatism? You can say you're a conservative for whatever. These people are conservatives, or communist conservatives, because they want to conserve the communism, the world socialism of human rights progress that's been made since 1948 or whatever. See what I'm saying? Just for your consideration. There is wider concern in the scientific community that privatization, accompanied by legal restrictions and high prices, will restrict scientists' access to data needed for their research. Yeah, because if there's property rights on it and intellectual property rights on it, they're going to be restricted. They're going to have their access restricted, and they want free access to everybody's everything. Especially if you're a scientist that doesn't get any, it gets all funded by the frickin' government anyway, right? And you have the possibility of getting patent rights limited or not out of that government anyways. Either way. That these trends have occurred within the context of economic globalization, which is capitalism on a world stage, okay, has further complicated the situation. Globalization versus globalism, again, I've gone over this before. It's not universal, it's not all the time, but generally, rule of thumb is that in collectivist doctrine, you're going to see globalization as the spread of capitalism, globalism is the spread of world socialism and human rights. Although there are hybrids of that. Globalization is inimical, which is hostile to human rights. Globalization is hostile to human rights, or obstructive. Human rights considerations in a variety of ways. The first is the value-oriented it promotes. The first is the values-oriented it promotes. Not the moral value, but the economic value or the profits to be made, right? So we got to have people before profits, right? Oh, is that the medical freedom movement too? Oh, a human rights approach is predicated on the centrality of protecting and nurturing human dignity. There's that human dignity. human rights, or the dignity of human rights is the dignity of being conforming to your master. That's what it is. The first is the value-oriented it promotes. A human rights approach is predicated on the centrality of protecting and nurturing human dignity and the common good. It evaluates science according to its ability to promote these goals. In contrast, commercialization and privatization place greatest emphasis on the profitability of science and its contributions to economic competitiveness. Economic globalization also promotes reliance on the market and translates other values into economic property discourse. Studies have shown that this conception and assumptions underlying property discourse tend to influence the crowds out other modes of evaluation. They crowd out other modes of evaluation, which would be the social. So you got capitalism pushing out and profits pushing out the social, universal collectivist good, right? Collectivism 101, collectivist doctrine 101. This is straight out of just collectivist doctrine, just diatribe against capitalism. Is straight out of the Communist Manifesto. The presumption is that other models of valuation can and should be translated into market terms. Okay, just a diatribe against capitalism. Additionally, globalization encourages the reconceptualization of the role of the state, reducing its regulatory redistributive functions and privatizing the performance of many services. So, like again, you've got the socialists, the world, basically you've got the progressives here putting themselves in the context as the conservatives protecting the advancements already made towards that world socialism of human rights and the common good and the destruction of private property rights. Yeah. This is problematic for the realization of human rights. Again, I'll read that again so you understand the context again. Globalization encourages a reconceptualization of the role of the state. Not the all-powerful, all-giving, but protecting the property rights and individual rights secured in the Constitution. It flips the script. Reconceptualizes the role of the state, reducing its regulatory and redistributive functions. Remember, we're supposed to have limited powers or limited government, but this is like Mahalter. Mahalter's been freaking espousing this shit on all the freaking with the medical freedom movement. This is Mahalter's been saying the same shit. Reducing its regulatory and distributive functions and privatizing the performance of many services. This is problematic for the realization of human rights. Yes. Like Mahalter blamed the tyranny of COVID on our limited form of government. These people are saying the same shit here. The recognition of rights confers reciprocal duties and obligations for their realization, and human rights law usually vests these responsibilities in the state. Again, obligations on the state for the common good. Thus, an ambitious human rights agenda, particularly in the relationship to the realization of economic, social, and cultural rights, requires a strong and effective state. Yes, just Mahalter all the way. However, at the century's end, key elements of the welfare state model are being cast aside, and again, it's all in the bullshit. Freaking progressive, collectivists, revolutionaries acting as the new conservatives. And this is back in '98, right, or '99. This often comes at the expense of assuming direct responsibility for social welfare and the common good as defined by human rights norms. Okay. Conception. Let me see. The second and third sections of this paper are in the form of case studies of two contested subjects: gene patenting and database protection. And it's conceptualizing Article 15 of the Rights to Science and Culture Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This Article 15 of the ICESCR, the Science and Cultural Rights, builds on the text of parallel articles in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and a whole slew of other world socialist everything. Okay. Therefore, it is not surprising that some eminent members of the scientific community took an active part in public debate after the war regarding the development of the Code of Universal Human Rights. Yes, go back up here. Like other provisions of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the context for drafting Article 27, which said everyone has a right to the protection of moral and materialistic interests resulting from any scientific, literary, or artistic production of which he is the author. No, the author, not the owner. Everyone, not just the author, but everyone. See the conflict? That's right in the Declaration of Human Rights. Therefore, it is not surprising that some eminent members of the scientific community took an active part in the public debate after the war, after World War II, the Nazis, right, regarding development of Code of Universal Human Rights norms so that we don't get Nazis again, right? Or Stalin. They included Julian Huxley, the British biologist and writer for the first director of the United Nations of UNESCO, and the American chemist W.A. Noyes and J.M. Berger. All three of these guys had big roles to play in the centralization of science and the internationalization of science, and the constitution of what is or isn't science on a centralized after World War One. Conceptualizing science within a human rights framework, however, required more than just insulating science and technology from potential misuse or even protecting the public from exposure to the harmful effects of science. Like the language and other provisions of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 27 recognizes a series of rights or claims. All of these rights, including those related to science and culture, are considered to be universal, which means they belong to the collective, vested in each person by virtue of their common humanity. The rights articulated in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights are also held to exist independently of recognition or implementation of the customs or legal systems or particular countries. So no matter what your Constitution says, the world socialism of human rights is going to hold your country to account, going to hold your government to account to its obligations, which are prima facie in upholding and ensuring the delivery of human rights. Yeah, human rights are held to comprise important norms that create prima facie obligations, particularly on the part of governments, to take positive measures to protect and uphold these rights. Governments are obligated to uphold the common good aspect of human rights, not the individuals, but the universal aspect, the common good for the betterment of collective, whatever, meets the needs of the planner's good. The world socialism of human rights versus the technological colonialism of patent rights and intellectual property rights. They, a lot of times in different, collectivist doctrine, they're referred to as colonialism, technological colonialism of patents and the protection of intellectual property rights. You've got this this organization here is the technological colonialism, is this sustainability directory. They kind of get in here to what the definition of technological colonialism is. And what they do is they project the tyranny, if you will, of European colonialism and European powers around the world, the colonialism, imperialism, where they took over countries and enslaved the peoples or whatever, confiscated everything, they just claimed it for themselves. That colonialism, that imperialism, is projected onto free markets, free market enterprise, capitalism, and property rights, which is they're not the same. But that's what technological colonialism is, and how they do. Technological colonialism is the imposition of technological systems by dominant entities on less powerful ones, mirroring historical colonialism, but in the digital sphere. In the digital sphere, it's basically capitalism becomes the imperialism. And Lenin kind of wrote the same thing. Lenin wrote the same thing in Weather Underground back in the 60s. If you read their communist, their manifesto in 1969, you don't need a weatherman to the weatherman. Their 69 manifesto. Don't need a weatherman to tell you which way the wind's blowing. Bob Dylan kind of thing took off from that, right? But yeah, it's all the same. Imperialism is just capitalism on the world stage, same as globalization. And another thing is the global South must remain vigilant against technological colonialism. The other people, this is the Communist Party of China, saying the same shit. You know, I just want to show you this. Let me see. Yeah. Fair and equitable access to technology is a public good, and it's an inalienable right. Inalienable. Not unalienable, but inalienable. And it can't be alienated from the duties owed back to the collective. That's what it is. So there you go. You've got, this whole sustainable directory, the sustainable development shit, sustainable development goals, the world socialism of human rights, which is all redistributive justice, all the same shit. And you've got the Communist Party of China all out there espousing all the same shit against intellectual property rights. Then you got the International Research Council and its unions from 1919 to 1931. Now, I've gone over this. Minnie P's getting restless here. Here, you getting restless, P. All right, I give you here a little something. Here you go, girl. Kind of going over a little bit, touching a little bit on the centralization of science and how the whole of science has been centralized on what is science, what constitutes science, what doesn't constitute science, what any avenue of science, I don't know, archaeology, mathematics, biology, and any of the individual siloed specialities in that. Who gets to determine what is legitimate, what isn't legitimate, what is science, what isn't science? You see what I'm saying? And what are we gonna codify into that? What agendas are the world science of world socialism, scientists of world socialism going to be pushing? What are they going to codify into that? And they codify the world socialism of human rights and the atheism. Goes back to Comte too. And not just Comte, but many others, where a belief in God is just an aspect of our human societal evolution. I mean, you can't really blame him for believing in God. I mean, we've had Brett Weinstein kind of espousing the same kind of shit in his evolutionary biology. It was like, you can't really blame him, It's because it's a part of the evolutionary process that will eventually grow out of, and so you can't hate him for it. You got to give him a little leeway, because even our evolutionary aspect of science says, it's a natural part of. They'll grow out of it. It's all part of the same world socialism of human rights. But you've got this centralization of science, and it goes back to World War I era. And in 1930, it was, with its authority terminally undermined, the IRC, which is this International Research Council, began procedures that led a year later to its demise and replacement with a new International Council of Scientific Unions. The transition was far more than an administrative adjustment. It marked the end of a venture in centralized organization of scientific research. A centralized organization of scientific research, and a decisive move towards the federation of autonomous disciplinary unions, the status that the International Science Council, that they're now called, retains the same today. But What they're saying is that it marked the end of the centralized organization of scientific research toward a more nationalist union. I don't get what they're saying here. Is instead of a single global consensus, now I guess they're pushing for autonomous disciplinary unions, but all those autonomous disciplinary unions all have to be drinking the same Kool-Aid. It doesn't matter. They all got to be drinking the same world socialist Kool-Aid. This International Science Council, the right to participate in and benefit from science. It's the right to science. You see what I'm saying? They're all pushing the same shit here. It says the ICS is the International Science Council's interpretation of the right to participate in and benefit from science, provides a clear framework for understanding the right to science, emphasizing its application in research, policy, and global access to scientific knowledge. It clarifies the obligations, opportunities, and responsibilities in ensuring universal access to science, fostering global dialogue to shape a more inclusive and sustainable future. Ugh. There you go. That's the International Science Council, okay? In there, you're going to find the right to participate and benefit from science. They got this little... And they go down through here. You got all different kinds of freaking propaganda on this thing for you to understand. A right to enjoy the benefits of society, a right to participate in science, a right to enjoy the benefits of science as the collective, as a universal right, a right to equitably access information, equitably. See what I'm saying? That International Science Council, IC funding and financing, they're pushing all this shit at the top of the list, along with China, Sweden, and the United Nations. Yeah, there's China. The U.S. National Science Foundation. China Association of Science and Technology. United Nations. But anyways. So you've got overview of this International Science Council memberships, just to give you an idea who's in this thing. These are all the centralization of science that's going on here. Close your eyes. Yeah. But just to give you an idea, some of these different unions and organizations, scientific organizations. China's on there 4 times. Holy crap. Hang on a second. Yeah. Let me see what else I got here. Oh, yeah, it is right here. The International Association of Applied Psychology. Applied psychology tactics. That's where you get a lot of those motivational tactics that they utilize, social contract theory to make you feel guilty for not taking the vaccine, nudge tactics, motivational interviewing skills, a couple different ones. Halo, applied psychology, the stuff that they utilize to manipulate people, to psychologically, military-grade psychological manipulation. They're part of this group, too. World scientific organizations all on the same freaking page. I mean, deciding who is, what isn't, who's legitimate, who isn't legitimate. Climate change deniers gonna definitely be illegitimate. Anybody pushing back on the vaccines definitely gonna be legitimate. Anybody pushing back on freaking big government and runaway government spending is definitely gonna be illegitimate. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. Yeah. I got note the global consensus intrinsic and or implicit to such a social humanities-based organizing of science. Yeah, it's all in the humanities. Humanities is social science, sociology. That's what the humanities are. Basically, just another aspect of sociology. One of my proudest moments when my son was graduating college, and he was like all kinds of honors, right? This guy is like, he's really good in school. He's pretty smart, smarter than I ever was, man, and done way better in school. I just got away with the skin of my teeth. I didn't do jack shit, just barely got out of school, you know. And this guy got out with flying colors. All his professors were all raving about how smart he was and everything. Kids always, yeah, whatever. But anyways, one of my proudest moments was when they asked him, what's the most stupid thing? What's the most worthless thing about your education or some point? And he said the humanities. It was great. It was right on stage in front of everybody, too. He said the most worthless thing about his education was the humanities. Proud moment. Yes, my boy. Human rights. Based world socialist right to science is being codified into not only education, public health, and right to repair policies is being codified into the whole of our legal system from judges on down. This is that whole dangerous thing on the centralized science on where it's coming from and where it's going to. They got this organization, ASSIST here, the Association for Information Science and Technologies, Science and Human Rights Coalition report. Again. Human rights. Assist representative to the American Association for the Advancement of Science. This is AAAS. We came across that a little earlier. Science and Human Rights Coalition on the coalition meeting on climate change and human rights. This is from 2017. Okay, 2017. From the AAAS, the American Association for the Advancement of the Sciences, Science and Human Rights Coalition. As the ASSIST representative, I participated in January 26 to 27, 2017 AAAS Science and Human Rights Coalition in the council meeting in Washington, D.C. Our newly appointed second ASSIST representative also participated in the meetings. The coalition is a very distinguished group of representatives from more than 30 members and affiliated organizations, as well as 70 individuals. 30 members and affiliated organizations, as well as 70 individuals affiliated with affiliated scientists. The member organizations included groups in a wide range of scientific and engineering, as well as humanities and social sciences. Of course, tenets of the revolution must be codified into science. Tenets of the collectivist revolution have been codified into public health, One Health. Tenets of the revolution codified into science in general, humanities and social sciences. You codify them, you're codifying the tenets of world socialist revolution, world collectivism. Members got all these different memberships, and you can go in there and find out who all these people. Sociologists Without Borders. I didn't need to say any more, right? But anyways, the coalition described itself broadly as a network of scientific and engineering memberships, organizations that recognize a role for scientists and engineers in human rights. Now, Jesus, is FLCC on here? I mean, is the wellness company on here? Because they aren't pushing back against any of this shit, are they? I'm just wondering. The January meeting focused on the human rights to water. Human right to water. Connection between climate change and human rights may at first seem to be apparent to everyone. However, the issues are far greater and broader than many of us realize. All of us participating in the meeting certainly increased our understanding of the breadth and depth of these connections. Oh yeah, they're connected to everything. Everything's been socialized. Everything. Every sequence in your genome, everything. It may be surprising it took so long to be added to the list of human rights. Since it seems so obvious to most people, a lecturer on human rights at Columbia University said, it may be surprising that it took so long to be added to the list of human rights. Right to water or right to science, or what are they talking about? Oh, science is a human right. Okay. Yeah. It may be surprising it took so long to be added to the list of human rights. I think we're talking about science here. Since it seems to be so obvious to most people, said Inga Winkler, a lecturer in human rights at Columbia University. You know, like Mary Holland was. Right? Oh, you don't believe me. You don't believe me. You don't believe me? Yeah. Mary Holland. Holland taught on the faculty at NYU 17 years and lectured at Columbia Law School on international human rights. Yeah, Mary Holland. Children's health defense. People before profits, baby. Right? So, there you go. But figuring out how exactly to define each aspect of that right is less obvious and will require help from social and physical scientists. They're getting scientists to centralized science is going to determine where this right to science is and how it's going to overrule our right to property, intellectual property or patents or whatever. Okay, the traction that was first gotten in the Human Genome Project when the government, the NIH, a government agency, put in applications for patents on the human genome. This is where they get the traction to come after our property rights from this. Right? The meeting, held at AAAS headquarters, gathered scientists, engineers, health professionals, and human rights advocates, community activists, and policymakers to discuss water and human rights. Under the existing system in the United States, poor cities and towns get the water they can afford. Many of the sessions focus on the role of STEM community in addressing these issues. So STEM sciences, you think the sciences are sciences? They're socialized sciences. It's not science, it's socialized science. And I've got this right here, this American Association for Advancement of Sciences. Right here, this AAAS. We're going to come down in here and a couple things on this organization. The American Association for the Advancement of Science and the courts. This is where I'm telling you, I'm going to show you how they are taking this centralized science and they've codified it into our public health with One Health. They've codified it into science with the humanities, and now they're going to codify that One Health, the tenets of world socialism, of human rights, and humanities. They're going to codify that into our legal system. They're codifying scientists. This centralized science is going to codify what they're putting and what they're pushing on the world socialism. And it's assault on our private property rights. It's assault on our individual rights altogether. You're going to codify these things in as what human rights laws do that now. But these scientists, they're training our lawyers and our judges to view the legal system and our Constitution on down through the eyes of the world socialism of human rights. They're codifying this shit into our legal system. And this is one of the big organizations doing it. American Association for Advancement of Sciences. About the advancement of this. Right, let me just go here. I'm going to show you what these guys are. Science in the courts. Okay. The American Association for the Advancement of Science, Center for Scientific Responsibility and Justice, Scientific Responsibility and Justice, is dedicated to assembling emerging legal issues in science and technology. Is dedicated to assessing emerging legal issues in science and technology, promoting the use of scientific evidence in legal settings, and offering expert support to legal community through a range of projects and initiatives. The Scientific Responsibility and Justice fosters collaboration between scientists and legal professionals, aimed to enhance the understanding and application of scientific principle within the legal system. Who gets to determine what that scientific principle is? Who gets to determine what that science is or isn't? Who gets to determine who is a legitimate who represents legitimate science in our courts or in our legal system? And if you've codified the tenets of the World Socialist Revolution into these determinations, any pushback against them, again, you've codified the tenets of the revolution into our legal system itself. This is what I'm seeing. This is what I'm trying to show you for your consideration. The American Association for the Advancement of Sciences, here, the National Conference of Lawyers and Scientists, was established in 1974 as a joint standing committee of AAAS and the American Bar Association Section Science and Technology Law. Does anybody else see the conflict here with our founding principles? Does anybody else see the danger here? How from the inside out the whole of our republic is being deconstructed within and by our legal system at the nudging of the global organization of science and academia? I don't know. Maybe I'm the only one. I am just seeing things, right? National Conference of Lawyers and Scientists. Yeah, scientific evidence in the courts. Conference recording scientific evidence in the courts 2023. Sessions recordings from last year's scientific evidence. Got recordings on all this. So you can go there and you can go down through this. Hang on a second. Maybe just, yeah, I don't know. You got artificial intelligence in the courts. Okay? What is or isn't scientific evidence? Artificial intelligence and the courts. Materials for judges. Materials for judges. All right. And I just want to point this out. They got this AI thing, but here's the other thing. They want to bring this AI into our legal system. I got this article here. It's not too long ago. It's AI hallucinations in court papers spell trouble for lawyers. Now, this whole AI thing. The AI basically, you Google anything on Google now. AI, the first thing on top, you have AI on top. It's the first thing that pops up. Right or wrong, made up or fabricated, it pops up, right? And it's crazy how messed up that those responses from AI can be. But it's doing its thing, just like Wikipedia at large. It pushes the agenda. You look up something on Wikipedia, you're going to get what the central planners and the central narrative want you to see on everything. Okay. Same thing with artificial intelligence. With Google and the algorithms and the search engines are all geared towards pushing. They're fixed to push the agenda of the central planners and the central narrative, so that is what pops up in front of you first. It's a master manipulation. You have the world at your fingertips. You have the world socialist perspective at your fingertips, literally, unless you know how to navigate around that. And then you might be able to come up with other information outside the collectivist box. But anyways, this article right here, it's out of Reuters. Hallucinations in the courts spell trouble for lawyers. And I just a little piece of this just so you can get an idea what's going on here. And February 18th, 2025, not too long ago, U.S. personal injury law firm Morgan & Morgan was sent an urgent email, opens new tab. This month, to its more than 1,000 lawyers, artificial intelligence can invent fake case law, and using made-up information in court filings could get you fired. Yeah. A federal judge in Wyoming had just threatened to sanction 2 lawyers in the firm who included fictitious case citations in a lawsuit against Walmart. One of the lawyers admitted in court filings last week that he used an AI program that hallucinated the cases and apologized for what he called an inadvertent mistake, because he took one of these sources or AI and I just put it out there and didn't do the work to see if it was, but that's what AI is supposed to do. Now they got the codification of this AI stuff that these guys are pushing, so where's that gonna go? Where's that going to go? We're going to start accepting the freaking Kool-Aid that the AI is serving us as sort of like a chevron of AI. Oh, if AI says it, then it's got to be right. You see what I'm saying? American Association for the Advancement of Sciences and Judicial Seminars. Beginning in 2000, this is this article here. Just trying to show you how they're getting into and manipulating our legal system. They're codifying this shit into our legal system. The world socialism. The tenets of world socialist revolution into our legal system. Beginning in 2006, AAAS has convened 2-day judicial education seminars, emerging issues in neuroscience. There you go, Cooey. With support from Dana Foundation and in partnership with the American Bar Association's Judicial Division, the Federal Judicial Center, and National Center for State Courts. Hi, P. What's going on, kid? There? What's going on there? She's getting in. I'm going to try and get this wrapped up here. Yeah, the Federal Judicial Center and National Center for State Courts, AAA has since hosted more than 30 neuroscience seminars across the United States and more than 10 webinars. In 2009, they received the Judicial Education Award from the ABA's Judicial Division of National Conferences and Specialized Court Judges for its commitment to providing judicial education training through the judicial seminars and emerging issues in neuroscience. It seems our legal system has a world socialist opioid crisis of its own, and that opioid being the world socialism and the tenets of collectivist world socialist revolution, which would entail the world socialism of human rights and climate change and all that other dumb shit, right? Green agenda, everything, right? In 2019, AAS, again with support from the Dana Foundation, began offering one-day seminars on the opioid crisis. The seminar is targeted at state judges in whose courts the effects of this public health epidemic are experienced on a daily basis. Okay. American Association for the Advancement of Science and Judicial Seminars on Climate Change. The climate, we're going to get back to that opioid crisis thing here in a minute. The Judicial Association for the Advancement of Science and Judicial Seminars on Climate Science. The Climate Judicial... Here's the article. I'm making this shit up. The Climate Judiciary Project was a partnership between the Environmental Law Institute and AAAS with Federal Judicial Center. April 2019, the Environmental Law Institute and AAAS began a pilot program of judicial education that aimed to meet judges' need for a basic familiarity with current climate science to keep pace with the climate issues emerging in civil, regulatory, and criminal litigation. Okay, and I've got this influence watch. I went to them. Who is this Environmental Law Institute? All right, Environmental Law Institute. This is Influence Watch here. The Environmental Law Institute, and they kind of go into a little bit on the bio of these guys. Check them out, see what's going on here. Is a left-of-center environmentalist legal advocacy organization. ELI runs a judicial education program to teach judges left-of-center climate policy. Not the only one seeing this shit. And an environmental justice initiative to teach far left concept of environmental justice. The organization also supports the critical race theory influence conceptual of racial justice. They're codifying criminal race. Of course, critical theory is a Marxist theory. Critical race theory is just a derivative of that critical theory. Again, to advance the world socialism and tenets of world socialist revolution. Yeah. Partnership organizations. Earth Justice, Environmental Defense Fund, Southern Environmental Law Center versus Southern Poverty Law Center, the Sierra Club, IBM Corporation. They've also corporate partnership with the American technology firm IBM, Coca-Cola Company, DuPont, Lockheed Martin, Pfizer, Amazon, General Electric, PepsiCo, Walmart, and others. Yep. Funding, they get funding from Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. That's Johnson & Johnson, right? You can see things on here that, you can I go here and just check this shit out for yourself. I mean, I'm not the only one that can click on these freaking things. But you can see that all these people, they're funders, they got an agenda. They're pushing an agenda. They're codifying the tenets of the world socialist revolution into our legal system. They're doing it. Okay, and I got this This whole Environmental Law Institute, the LEI, okay, this is where we go. This is their logo here. The human rights and environment. Human rights. They're pushing human rights, the world socialism of human rights. The UN General Assembly's 2022 recognition of the right to clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. Help to, just like you have a right to environment, you have a public right to health, you have a public right to sustainability, a sustainable environment. Now, our Constitution says we have a right to a republic. Health to evaluate the interwoven relationship between human rights and the environment. Over 2 years after this monumental recognition, how is this right being optimized? Join the Environmental Law Institute for a special add-on session to our Summer School 2024 series focused on human rights in the environmental context. This, of course, our right to health would be influenced by a clean environment. And if you have a right to health, you would have a right to a clean environment because that affects your health. See what I'm saying? This session will use an international lens to discuss how human rights intersects with the environment and environmental law across the world. See also Human Rights Day 17. Human Rights Day 2017, a reflection on human rights and environmental rule of law. This is another article on that same subject. There's Eleanor Roosevelt pushing the world socialism of human rights into the world and the United States. Okay, American Association for Advancement of Science judicial seminars on the opioid crisis epidemic. Okay, AAA, supported by the Dana Foundation, piloted judicial seminars on the opioid crisis for state judges. We have singled out the state judges because they are the ones who see the results of opioid addiction on a daily basis, for example, in criminal or family courts. The goal of these seminars is to familiarize judges with the neuroclinical and social science aspects of opioid abuse and addiction. So this is all on the social things. Of course, in the collectivist revolution, world socialist revolution, it's because of our dominant society, it's because of our our Constitution, because of our limited form of government, because of capitalism, because of property rights, whatever, the social aspects, the social determinants of the opioid crisis. Okay, just like we have the social determinants of health, we have the social determinants of every frickin' thing now. The goal of these seminars is to familiarize the judges with the neuroclinical and social science aspects of opioid crisis and addiction. And I got down here, I got an opioid side note, progressive collectivists using the opioid crisis via critical theory, like they said they were already involved with this critical theory, okay, to push the world's collectivism of redistributive justice of public health solutions. Human rights-based public health solutions. And I got the Center for American Progress comes out, okay? Tackling the opioid crisis requires a whole-of-government, society-wide approach. This comes from the Center for American Progress, an obvious freaking leftist Democrat freaking run organization, left-wing, whatever you want. But here, tackling the underlying causes of drugs use, I got here, they use the opioid crisis via critical theory and critical race theory to push the world collectivism of redistributive social justice and public health conditions. Let me see. I showed this already. Tackle the underlying causes of drug use in communities. The increase in deaths attributed to drug overdose, alcohol, and suicides between 1999 and 2013 has been referred to as the deaths of despair. Addressing social determinants of health. There you go. And unequal access to substance use treatment services is therefore critical. The COVID-19 pandemic also led to social isolation. Loneliness, like Matthias Desmet calls it, right? Our loneliness. That's that bullshit right there. Addressing the COVID-19 pandemic also led to social isolation, which capitalism and individualism does the same shit, which, according to Matthias Desmet and Hannah Arendt, of course, in the isolated, atomized individualism, as Hegel put it, and isolated individual, as Marx put it. I think get Hegel and Marx mixed up there, but something to that effect, which has been cited as a factor regarding opioid crisis. The social isolation has been cited as a factor. The lockdowns. It's the lockdowns, right? But that's not where they're going. Policies and programs to support people in meeting their basic needs, such as child care, universal paid sick time, and workforce development investments, along with jobs and community investment, can reduce poverty and improve economic security, addressing some of the social determinants that drive drug use. Criminal justice and racial equity solutions. Actionable criminal legal reform measures are needed to address fentanyl misuse and the opioid crisis, but they should reject the aggressive enforcement strategies that proliferate during the disastrous war on drugs. I've mentioned this before. I think one of the big reasons why, or could be one of the big reasons why, that they don't want to push this opioid crisis and jump on the bandwagon or expose this opioid crisis as the crisis that it is because that whole critical race theory narrative. Is if you go after these drugs and try to clean the streets up of all these drugs, of course, the disparities and the whole critical theory on how it affects people of color or marginalized communities or, oppressed peoples. There's a conflict between those two narratives. But this is, they're kind of addressing that conflict there, is that the actionable criminal legal reform measures are needed to address fentanyl misuse in the opioid crisis, but they should reject the aggressive law enforcement, where the whiteness of America has targeted the blackness of the oppressed, marginalized peoples that are using these drugs, right? That are getting arrested because you've got more minorities of one race or another race getting arrested than white people. That's the accusatory. So, yeah. But they should reject the aggressive enforcement strategies that proliferated during the disastrous war on drugs. A progressive war on drugs that they fail to mention here. Progressive policy. War on crime. War on drugs is part of the war on crime. War on poverty, same shit. Despite similar rates of drug use across races, research has shown that the racial and ethnic minorities racial and ethnic minorities are more likely than white people to be incarcerated for drug offenses. Specifically, African Americans are imprisoned at nearly 6 times the rate of white individuals for drug charges. Now, that same argument is being used in anarchist doctrine, revolutionary communist anarchist doctrine, as a justification for the abolishment of all prisons. Abolish all prisons. It goes back to Emma Goldman was saying the same shit in 1900s, early 1900s. The progressive era. Anarchist doctrine was saying the same shit when you can go back to Bakunin and Proud Hand, and they're all saying the same shit too. It's all just a reiteration of anarchist, communist doctrine of old. So this is why one of the things that I have brought up and I have questioned, I wonder why, and Mark Kulak is wondering why, pointing out why won't these people bring up the opioid crisis? Why isn't it ever mentioned by any of these people? In medical freedom movement, left, right, center, none of them are bringing up this opioid crisis. And anybody who's pushing this critical theory shit is going to be, the Marxism of this critical theory stuff is going to be going to hold off on that whole opioid crisis thing, because they're not going to want to point out. Now, how many people? What's the breakdown? On opioid deaths. Is it affecting the black community more than the deaths? Are they, what rates? Where's the death rates on that? As far as a racial breakdown, that'd be an interesting thing to probably look at. Only because what narrative? I mean, I don't know. I haven't looked at it. It'd be an interesting thing to do, is the breakdown on that. I would imagine. I wouldn't even dare guess where the stats are on that, on how the death rate in the opioid crisis is on a racial breakdown. And would that give reason or lack of reason there for the greater progressive left or right that's pushing back on the criminal justice system and wanting the abolish of all prisons, and the anti-law enforcement sentiment in general that comes out of things like the 1619 Project and whatnot? It's all part of the same world socialism. It has the tenets. It's the tenets of the same world socialism that embodies the redistributive justice of human rights. It's all the same. It's all the same. It's all the same collectivism. It's all the same world socialism embodied by human rights, and redistributive justice and everything. The other thing about this, opioid crisis here, specifically African Americans are imprisoned at nearly 6 times the rate of white individuals for drug charges. On a side note here, I wonder how many opioid-related overdoses and or suicides were counted as COVID deaths. This is the other thing that I got into. Due to the billions of dollars in double dose incentives paid per COVID positive, and the high probability that such an overdose, death, or suicide would not be covered by life insurance. I'm just asking this question is because I know people who have had family members that have died from drug overdose and also considered a suicide. Again, a drug overdose, is it considered a suicide? When isn't it considered a suicide? Is it easier to consider it a suicide? Is a drug overdose self-administered automatically a suicide? I don't know. But this question is asked because I know people who have had family members die from a drug overdose, fentanyl drug overdose, foaming at the mouth fentanyl drug overdose, whose family knew the doctors that were working in the hospital, and whose family knew who the coroner was in that county, city, town, wherever they lived, who the coroner was. The family of the person who died from a fentanyl drug overdose, because they were drug addicts and they got fentanyl, they died. They were addicts, known addicts. But during the COVID, who died during the COVID lockdowns, during the COVID pandemic, under the COVID protocols that were paying people all kinds of money. They know they go into the hospital on a drug overdose, and then they get the death certificate back saying they died from COVID. we know that the opioid crisis has, in and of itself, was so bad that it has dropped our life expectancy. Yet it doesn't want to be talked about. It's not brought up, only sparingly, here and there. You'll hear it brought up. But it's not rolled into the all-cause mortality of the opioid crisis, but neither is the population curve of these different things. These population pyramid and the age group over 65 and reaching life expectancy because of the baby boom bump that come up into the over 65 age group, exponentially increasing certain age groups as much as 40 or 50% over life expectancy. But they're not being rolled into to that all-cause mortality. But you have this freaking these drug overdoses that they're just being written off as COVID. Well, because they're getting paid lots of money. People don't even get into the hospital until they test positive for COVID. Once they test positive for COVID, that's it, man. It's the cause of death, COVID. Of course, because that pushes the numbers of COVID up. The other thing you might want to look into there is life insurance policies. Now, I've known people that were in life insurance policies won't cover an overdose or a suicide, or potentially won't. I'll throw that out there, that caveat. Potentially won't cover a life, an overdose, a drug overdose. Where if you get that COVID diagnosis, you get the insurance money, you get to collect on the insurance money. So anybody who's got a family member that goes in and gets as a drug overdose, and you get told, well, he died from COVID, you're like, oh, what the? And you're like, well, wait a minute, you might want to reconsider fighting back on. You ain't gonna want to push back on this because you're not going to be able to collect on the life insurance. So there's a lot of nefarities that are happening in that, a lot of freaking hustling going on in there, So that's just another thing, just something to throw out there for your consideration, how these things are being manipulated. And within the context of the greater revolutionary socialism that is actually pushing back as an anti-law enforcement. It's got the same freaking shit as was being used in anarchist doctrine of old. But you're talking Prodham, Bakunin, right? We're saying the same shit in the 1800s. The same shit. As far as disparate impact, incarceration levels, and how bad what, Emma Goldman. Abolish all prisons, man. It's all based on the same shit. The whole narrative where Angela Davis in her prison industrial complex, Angela Davis, the revolutionary communist that, helped shoot up whose guns were taken by George Jackson's Black Guerrilla Family gang that he started in prison, an offshoot of the other gangs on the street, Maoist gangs. Weather Underground was affiliated with that and supported that, where they got in a shootout in a court. The Soledad brothers, the Soledad brothers was one of these people that were taken into courts, and George Jackson's, and it was Angela Davis's guns, where George Jackson's brother came with Angela Davis's guns, and they wound up getting just shootout with the bailiffs and the corrections officers that were there, and police officers that were there on that case. And then George Jackson wound up getting shot in prison after he murdered several officers when he got a gun brought to him by his lawyer, where he hid it in his hair and brought it back to the special housing unit. And he was getting frisked by the officer there, and he took the gun out of his hair and shot that officer and shot a couple other officers. They slit the throats of a couple officers, let a bunch of inmates out. They were all killing each other too. And then he took off through the courts with this gun, and one of the officers in the tower shot him. And they say that he was murdered by the prison industrial complex, right? So he's a cop killer. And one of the guys that is held by the communist revolutionary movement, communist vanguard, as the guy who came up with the whole carceral state, the prison as a segregated, is the whiteness of America segregating the black populations, and just another new Jim Crow. As I think Michelle Alexander's got a couple books out there. Michelle Alexander is one of them. She's one of the people also behind like the whole 1619 project. They're pushing that, the whole narrative. You know, the whole prison is the new Jim Crow, segregating the whiteness of America, segregating the unwanted, criminalized races away from white privilege. That's the accusatory. And it's all being rolled in here. It's all, that whole narrative is being rolled in here. Right here. To justify, and using the opioid crisis to justify more money and more spending and more progressive policies. This is just what I wanted to show you. How the opioid crisis is being used to advance those tenets of the revolution, and being used to advance the revolution at large. When to cure that, to address that and have law enforcement address it. Well, maybe law enforcement isn't the only way to address it, but if you've got illegal activities, especially, you want to address it on the street, then you're taking a tool away to advance more progressive advancement of the revolution. It's right there. American Association for the Advancement of Science's Right to Science. Now we get into the right to science here. You got the right to science in Article 15. Like I said, this Article 15 shows up of the International Covenant on Economic and Social Cultural Rights. Okay? Again, this is that Article 15 right here. And the states parties to the present covenant recognize the right of everyone to take part in cultural life, to enjoy the benefits of scientific progress and its applications, everyone to the benefit of protection of moral and material interests resulting from any scientific, literary, or artistic production of which he is the author. No, not the owner, just the author. The steps to be taken by the state parties to present covenant to achieve the full realization of this right shall include those necessary for the conservation, the development, and diffusion of science and culture. The states parties to the present covenant undertake to respect the freedom indispensable for scientific research and creative activity. The states parties to the present covenant recognize the benefits to be derived from the encouragement and development of international contracts and cooperation in the scientific and cultural fields. You see what I'm saying? This is that Article 15. As a program devoted to mobilize science and scientists to advance human rights. Okay. The Center for Scientific Responsibility and Justice is committed to promoting Article 15 and engaged in scientists in that effort. And this International Covenant on Economic and Social Cultural Rights is the American Association for Advancement of Sciences. Right to Science is the same people that were training our judges and lawyers and codifying this shit into our legal system. Okay? The same people. Alright? Just wanted to point that out here in case you lost that. Yeah. The premise of Article 15 project is that just as governments are expected to adopt measures to respect the rights and freedoms of expression and a fair trial, so too are they obligated to uphold the right of society and the collective, I put that in the right there, to the benefit of science and progress for everyone, for all, right? To date, however, governments have largely ignored their Article 15 obligations and neither the human rights nor the specific communities have brought their skills and influential voices to bear on the promotion and application of this right in practice. The SRJ, okay, social justice, science justice, believes that the rationalization of Article 15 requires that scientists take up this neglected right. The Center for Scientific Responsibility and Justice, believes that the rationalization of Article 15 requires that the scientists take up this neglected right toward that end, and the project is. So they want this right to science as a collective, as a common good. Scientists need to take this up themselves. Build a clearinghouse of information and resources about Article 15. Create a database of state reports to the United Nations on implementation of Article 15. Identifying exemplars of state practice in the realization of this right. Designing and implementation pilot projects and demonstrate the value of this right in practice, raising the scientific community's awareness of the meaning, significance, and potential of applications of Article 15, particularly through the AAAS Science and Human Rights Coalition. Working with scientific organizations to identify discipline-specific applications of Article 15 for the use in teaching, research, public education, and policy advising. This is that the AAS Science and Human Rights Coalition. Not seeing it. What I was looking for. Hang on. Anyways. Sorry about that. Dead end. I was looking for something, didn't see it. Yeah. So working with scientific organizations to identify discipline-specific applications for Article 15 for use in teaching, research, publication, public education, and the policy advancement, which would, basically want to codify this into, policies, which would be pushing the tenets of the revolution upstream into codifying it for systemic change into the whole of our society, including our legal system, right? Our public health care system, our education system. And I got this AAAS Scientific and Human Rights Coalition here. I got a little information on them. Human rights and codes of ethics and scientific professional societies. Human rights and codes of ethics of scientific and professional societies. American Association for the Advancement of Sciences. Human rights and codes of ethics of scientific and professional societies. just want to show you that. Human rights. Okay, the Science and Human Rights Coalition Working Group on Ethics and Human Rights aims to raise the visibility of human rights principles as part of the practice of science and its application, and that's what they were teaching. That's what they're teaching our lawyers in partnership with the American Bar Association, which is drinking the same frickin' Kool-Aid too, right? Yeah. The Science and Human Rights Coalition's Working Group on Ethics and Human Rights aims to raise the visibility of human rights principles as part of the practice of science and its applications in our legal system, including in our legal system, and our public health care system, and our education system, and wherever. One new initiative by Working Group is development of this statement that encourages professional societies to link their ethics codes and guidelines to human rights principles. Yeah. Professional, you're linking your ethics codes to human rights principles. To the world's socialism of human rights principles. Scientists, engineers, and health professionals have an important responsibility and role to play in promoting individual and societal public health, safety, and well-being. Integral to the responsibility is the realization of human rights for all people. International human rights documents make this connection clearer and more broadly in their explicit recognition of the right of everyone to enjoy the benefits of science, progress, and its applications. How's that going to affect intellectual property law? How is that going to affect the securing of intellectual property or patents for the regular guy, for anybody, not just the public-private partnership, fascist partners of government, or the NIH itself, like they did with the Human Genome Project, that gave us the track that gave the whole world socialist push to eradicate, our private property rights, which is the end goal of communism or world socialism anyway, is the abolishment of private property, as they said in the Communist Manifesto, right? Yeah. Yeah. Their explicit recognition of the right of everyone to enjoy the benefits of scientific progress and its applications. How well that right is realized will depend in large part on the capacity and willingness of the relevant technical communities to contribute their know-how and skills. While the efforts of individual scientists, engineers, and health professionals should be encouraged, it is through their professional societies that such efforts can be organized, that the science can be organized, that the codification of the world socialism of human rights into science can be organized and sustained in a way that can set the tone for their members. One way to approach this challenge is for the scientific, engineering, and health professional societies to incorporate human rights in their codes of ethics or similar ethics statements. Although each society can work through the detail of how it would accomplish this task, a clear statement expressing a commitment to promoting the principles enshrined in the international human rights instruments include the practice of human rights among their members could be an initial step. In that spirit, we offer some language that may be helpful to consider. Let me just see something. The American Bar Association Human Rights, have they codified that ethics? Let's just for shits and giggles, let's check something out here. Hang on a second. I'm off screen here. Just so that you can see this, I'm going to check something out here. Can you see that? Okay. Just for shits and giggles, I said, you know what? I'm going to check this out. I don't know. Doesn't work. There it is. Okay. Anyways, it's smaller, but I wanted you to be able to see this. The American Bar Association, okay, this is Human Rights Magazine. I gotta make this a little larger for you so you can see it. I don't know, this is the best we're gonna get it, I guess. Human Rights Magazine, American Bar Association Civil Rights and Social Justice section. Our award-winning quarterly magazine features the latest excerpt ideas, opinions, and discourse in human rights and civil rights. Human Rights Heroes, DEI. This is American Bar Association being adopted of people of color, marginalizing the marginalized, source of income discrimination and critical need for federal protection. Colorism, health, justice, and black women in health. This is all critical theory, critical race theory, all being codified in the American Bar Association. Implicit bias and racial disparities in healthcare. Human Rights Heroes, again, it's yeah. A network of over 10,000 lawyers, law students, academic advocates, and thought leaders committed to creating meaningful change in the Bar Association. Our mission, created in 1966 during the height of the Civil Rights Movement, the section of Civil Rights and Social Justice is the only membership entity within the American Bar Association dedicated solely to the civil rights, civil liberties, and human rights issues. Through education and advocacy, the section expresses the profession's commitment to achieving through the legal system the American ideals of justice, freedom, and equality for all. Since its founding, the section has continued to fulfill its original purpose by raising and addressing the often complex and difficult civil rights and civil liberties issues that arise in changing in a diverse society. In so doing, we ensure the protection of civil rights remain a focus of legal and policy. They're not separating the difference of what civil rights and human rights of civil human origin are versus the natural human rights endowed to us by our Creator that are actually secured in our Constitution. This is the American Bar Association. They're drinking the Kool-Aid. I just wanted to point that out. I just wanted to point that out. Just so that you could see that. The American Bar Association is definitely drinking the Kool-Aid, and they're working in partnership with these people that are pushing, that are codifying the tenets of the world socialism of human rights into our legal system in partnership with the American Bar Association. 10,000 lawyers. And just like it said before, in here, they're going to do it through your organized. It's just like here, human rights codes of ethics in scientific and professional societies. While the efforts of individual scientists, engineers, and health professionals should be encouraged, it is through their professional societies that such efforts can be organized and sustained in a way that can set the tone for their members. The same thing with legal organizations, right? The name of such society affirms that its commitment to the practice of disciplines human rights. For examples of some societies have incorporated human rights into their code of ethics, please see intersections of science, ethics, and human rights. The question on human rights protection. Let's just see what they got here. Let's see what they got here. The American Association for Advancement of Science past and present funders. We got below is a list of past and present funders of the program. Please note that this list will be updated periodically. Just to give you an idea who's funding this shit. Well, we got 3M. Oh, they make the masks, right? 3M Foundation, agency for oh, wait a second. Nope, I guess not. The Dana Foundation. Oh, yeah. Remember we talked about them. Ford Foundation. Johnson & Johnson. Merck. All the same people. National Science Foundation. National Institute of Health. The NIH. Open Society Institute. Soros. Rockefeller, Robert Wood, Johnson & Johnson, Rockefeller Foundation. And you get the idea, right? Same old, same old. The same people that were, same charities, the same NGOs that Norman Dodd was talking about back when G. Edward Griffin did an interview with him, right? How they were going back and changing the history of the United States. These people were, in order to advance their agenda and to discredit America, so that they could systematically deconstruct her. They targeted her for destruction. And that's how one of the ways they did it. This is another way. In the Science, which is the magazine, the AAAS magazine, connects human rights groups with science experts. This is what they do. Since its launch in 2008, On-Call Scientists, a project of the AAA Scientific Responsibility Human Rights and Law program, has created a global network to connect human rights organizations with volunteer scientists. Eager to contribute scientific knowledge, tools, or methods to a range of challenges and groups seek to resolve, the program has received more than 200 requests for volunteers who work on the project. Science has been hijacked a long time ago. Science, what is or isn't science? The definitions and the defining aspects of what the consensus, even though consensus does not science make, the consensus of science, in science, of what science is or isn't, has been hijacked by collectivism at large, world socialism, the world collectivism and world socialism. I mean, UNESCO. Look at UNESCO. Look at the Humanist Manifesto in 1932. What science is or what science isn't. You know, the humanistic science, a evolutionary humanistic science. You know, it's right up Brett Weinstein's alley, right? I'm almost done, P. I'm getting there, kid. But anyways, yeah. So they got a network of volunteer scientists eager to contribute their scientific knowledge to a global network to connect human rights organizations with volunteer scientists. This is the national science. This is the centralization of science. This is the organization of the centralization of science and what is or isn't science, and the social sciences are codified into what science is. Many of the activities, this is the change in continuity, 1971 to 1998. Many of the activities for which the AAAS is best known today emerged from the initiatives taken since 1970, drawing increasingly on support from foundations and federal agencies. Drawing increasingly on support from foundations and federal agencies. The association has built pioneering programs for bridging underrepresented groups into science, applying science to human rights, supporting the growth of science in the developing world, exploring issues of science, ethics, and law, tracking federal spending for R&D and research and development, and bringing scientists and engineers to work in Congress and executive agencies of government. Project 2061, not Project 19, but Project 21. 26, Project 1619, is that what it was? No, this is Project 2061. Has taken on the ambitious task of reforming American science education from kindergarten to 12th grade. That's Antonio Gramsci, man. It's Antonio Gramsci. They are going to codify this collectivism into our education, codify the world socialism of these human rights into our education, to create the next generations of to get your mindset so collectivized that as soon as the orders come down from central planning, you will be so trained in that collectivist mindset into the codifications of what science is, and the humanities will be codified into what science is or isn't. You'll be so thoroughly infused with the collectivist mindset. As soon as the orders come down from central planning, there will be what Antonio Gramsci referred to as spontaneous consent, spontaneous conformity. You won't even question the orders. You won't even question the central planning. This is it. This is it right here. I mean, Mateus Desmet writes a book and makes all kinds of money on the mysteries of what, this, and Malone throws it out there for this psychology of totalitarianism and this whole psychosis, mass psychosis thing. When all it is training. We've been being trained with a collectivist mindset forever. K through 12 grade. I actually got pre-K and pre-K now, right? You got pre-K and pre-K. Many people getting ready to get the hell out of here. Me too, but I want to wrap up on a few important things just for your consideration here. Antonio Gramsci is in Revolution, and you codify all this shit into the next generations of kids. And, they don't know anything about who they are as Americans. They don't know anything about America. They don't know anything about their Constitution. They don't know anything about their individual rights and liberty, their natural, unalienable rights and liberty, or the history of their country outside what the revolution targeting them for destruction has told them what it is. And that's what the critical theory, the critical race theory, the whole pedagogy of the oppressed, Paulo Freire's pedagogy of the oppressed has been teaching these guys, teaching these kids. That's all they know about who they are and what their rights are, what science is, what biology is, what God is, what nature is, what a right is. They don't know anything about what any of these things are outside what they've been taught. How to see and understand them from the perspective of the revolution, the world collectivism that has targeted them for destruction. I don't know anything about what our founding principles are outside what the revolutionary collectivism, the tenets of the collectivism, has taught them what they are from the perspective of the revolution targeting them for destruction. That's where we are. Every class that comes in, every class that goes into kindergarten is another round chambered. And then the chambers come around. A 12-chambered gun. You know, every that class graduates and another one gets loaded behind it, and another one gets loaded behind it, and another one gets loaded behind it. Then when they get to 12th grade and they graduate, every graduating class is every single class started is another round chambered. Every single graduating class is another round fired up into our society from the bottom up, as Gramsci said, to create that change. And those of us that are left, if there's any left, those of us that are left who know the difference between what that bullshit collectivism and that revolution says what our founding history is and what our founding principles are, what the 5,000-year leap is, what the idea of America was and is, what individual rights and liberty actually are. As we get older and that population pyramid comes up, that baby boom bump comes up, as we get old, baby boomers were drinking just as much collectivist Kool-Aid as anybody. They were just as progressive as anybody. That's part of why we are where we are, is because much of the baby boom generation just couldn't stop drinking the Kool-Aid. But there were still some left who remembered. There were still some left, you know, that knew the difference between, you know, what actual freedom and liberty was in a free society was and our founding principles are versus what the world's, that the collectivism that's targeted them for destruction says they are. Every single round, like he says, K through 12. Project 2061 has taken the ambitious task to reforming American science education from kindergarten to 12th grade. The science has become one of the world's most prestigious and widely quoted scientific journals, okay, as well as respected source of science news. In every class, underneath this critical theory, underneath the tenets being taught, the tenets of this collectivist revolution and collectivism at large, every class started as another round chambered, every class graduated as another round fired up into our society to push that as agents of change, to push that change upstream, to make it systemic. Go out and be agents of change, affect policy, affect change in every aspect of life. And as we've reached that tipping point, that critical mass where the American system, the American population at large, the vast majority of the American population at large. I mean, John Dewey wrote his pedagogic creed in what, 2000 or 1912 or some shit, right? Was it 1899 or 2000? Early, right around the turn of the century in the 1900s, peak of the progressive era. We're all products of a progressive education system, all of us, to at least some degree. So there you have it. And I just wanted to point that out. It's all the same shit, but it's there. Okay, the Directory for Scientific Association Society Actions on Human Rights says this website serves as a resource for scientific societies that may be interested in networking with other scientific societies or learning what other groups are doing in the area of human rights. This website will be one of interest to human rights organizations who are interested in partnering with scientific societies on specific activities. It's right there. One might be the Bar Association. One might, whatever. Public health. Any science. STEM. Show list of scientific societies codifying the world socialism of human rights into the facts of science. Oh, shit, sorry about that. I'll go back. This website serves as a resource for scientific societies that may be interested in networking other scientific societies or learning what other groups are doing in the area of human rights. This website will be of interest to human rights organizations who are interested in partnering with scientific societies and scientific activities. Spreading the wealth around, right? Show list of scientific societies codifying the world socialism of human rights into facts of science, from the American Association of University Professors to Sociologists Without Borders. Remember what Comte's sociology implies and entails. Like I said, all the sociology and the humanities, I guess what you would call that, is basically the queen of all sciences. The social sciences are the queen of the sciences, through which all the raw scientific data is filtered, and which the planners can decipher how to best utilize to further the evolution of human society towards its final end goal of a single global human organism. That's what that is. It sure as shit don't say that not much about, Wiki or, Influence Watch, the American Association for Advancement of Science is on Influence Watch. It doesn't really say anything in there about its global implications, Okay, the American Association for the Advancement of Sciences, AAAS, this is Influence Watch, has been accused of promoting a broadly left-leaning policy agenda and associating with front groups for the Soviet Union during the Cold War. The American Association for the Advancement of Sciences is a science advocacy organization based in the United States and the largest general science association in the world. AAS has been accused of promoting broadly left-wing leaning policy agenda and associating with front groups for the Soviet Union during the Cold War. I ain't making this shit up. But this is documented. It's documented. Its leaders have also been criticized for supporting environmentalist policies and promoting global population control measures. This is the same organization influencing our legal systems, that's teaching judges on what science is and what science isn't, teaching lawyers in partnership with the Bar Association on teaching what science is or isn't, and what can be to roll the world socialism and tenets of world socialist revolution and human rights into codify that definition of what these things are and what can be administered, allowed in court as evidence in court, not, or all of it. In the modern era, the AAAS has become more involved in promoting left-wing science activism, ideological activism performed in the guise of promoting science. Its involvement in the March for Science, which was organized in opposition to the election of policies of Donald Trump. Trump is just as collectivist as they are. It's just that they're competing collectivists, competing progressivisms, I guess. Rise of science activism. In the early 20th century, the AAAS began to shift its advocacy from the pursuit of funding for the scientific research to include general policy lobbying. In January of 1920 issue of Science, for instance, one member wrote, "The scientists have a duty to throw the light of truth on the field of political discussion, knowing well that his feet are set upon the path of progress." Progressive era progress of collectivism, of the advancement of human society away from individualism, a belief in God, towards the legitimacy of science over the fallacy or superstition of God or creation, any of that, right? It's all part of the same shit. In 1938, sociologist Walter Bradford Cannon was elected annual president of the AAAS, and under his leadership, the organization began to tilt towards socialism in Soviet Union. This is nothing new for these people. They've got a long, long history and momentum of advocating this shit. They're not teaching an old dog new tricks. It's an old dog with old tricks that can't be changed from that. Cannon was widely considered to be sympathetic to the Soviet Union and international socialist causes, and visited the Soviet Union in 1935, where he reportedly made friendly remarks about it. In 1943, Cannon became president. A lot of the people, Roger Baldwin was one of these guys that did the same shit. I mean, the Fabian socialists, they all did the same shit, right? Bernard Shaw. In 1943, Cannon became president of the American Soviet Medical Society, which promoted closer relationship with the USSR until its dissolution in 1949. Walter Cannon expressed his sympathies for socialism as a model of the scientific economy and society of the future, which is the same shit today, a position many of his fellow science activists in the AAA shared. According to one historian of the period, this science activist criticized the Great Depression era United States as, quote, a nation of alienated victims. Individualism goes back to Marx. I think it was Marx who actually referred to our individualism as alienated individuals. Hegel said atomized individuals, and which Anna Hardin also picked up, and Matthias Desmet rolled into his psychology of totalitarianism. A nation of alienated victims lacking control over their destinies, whereas the Soviets appeared to be a nation of self-conscious individuals willfully and deliberately constructing a rational human society instead of the moral hebdoad, dull and obligatory, amoral, unsounding deviation of a vicious, greedy, bourgeois civilization. The Soviets projected universal that's a diatribe, right? The Soviets projected universal solidarity predicated on individual contribution to the common good. Instead of saturine pessimism and the yearning for the satisfactions of bygone days, the Soviets extended the hope of a new world. This is a guy who ran the same organization, this AAAS, right? The American Association of Scientific Workers. In 1936, the AAAS and its British counterpart, the British Association for the Advancement of Sciences, held a conference in the United Kingdom at which radical members called for a Magna Carta of Science and a Supreme Court of Science to dictate policies to the world's nations. Scientists and Engineers for Social and Political Action, CESPA. Scientists and Engineers for Social and Political Action was a communist organization created around 1969 to oppose U.S. involvement in Vietnam. The AAAS officially recognized CESPA as a legitimate part of the AAAS in 1976. Much of this success in infiltrating the AAAS was documented by CESPA members in their bi-monthly magazine Science for the People. Science for the People called itself a vehicle for anti-war analysts and activity with an anti-imperialist worldview. Like I said, that would be anti-capitalist. CESPA developed close relations with the communist-aligned World Federation of Scientific Workers in 1970, another group doing the same shit. When the World Federation of Scientific Workers sponsored a trip for CESPA members to visit Hanoi, the capital of communist-controlled North Vietnam during Vietnam War. Shortly thereafter, Science for the People began organizing support for the North Vietnamese government, prompting the FBI to classify CESPA as a revolutionary activity or New Left organization for aiding the enemies of the U.S. during wartime. A New Left organization, which is the same shit. The New Left is what not only the Weather Underground came out of. The New Left is what the neoconservatives of today and the neoconservatives of today came out of that New Left. They were Trotskyites, neoconservatives, as was LaRoche and all the LaRochians today. All came out of the same Trotskyist New Left. All that shit that Matthew Urt and all them guys are all promoting all over Russian television and everything, anti-American shit that they're out there pushing on Russian television and all their chaos agents against the United States and against our founding principles on the world stage on behalf of the world collectivism, on behalf of the world collectivist revolution. Much of the success in infiltrating the AAS was documented by CESPA, and they were okay. Okay, all right. I'm just going down here a little bit more. Funding from these. Let's see. Oh, the president-elect for 2018-2019 is Margaret Hamburg. Hamburg served in the Obama administration as U.S. Food and Drug Administration Commissioner. She also served in the Clinton administration as Assistant Secretary for Planning and the Evaluation of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Secretary for Planning, Health and Human Services. His RFK Jr. done anything to undo what she's done or what they've done? Right? Yeah, I don't think so. Stephen Chu, a physicist who served as Secretary of Energy in President Barack Obama's cabinet, was elected president-elect for 2019 and 2020 term in January 9th of 2018. Environmentalist and physicist John Holdren served as AAAS president from 2006 to 2007 and AAAS board chair from 2000 to 2008. He later served as professor at the University of California, Berkeley, where he advocated against U.S. possession of nuclear weapons and left-wing environmentalist policies. Nothing new, right? Nothing new. Same old for these guys. He was later appointed assistant to the president for science and technology in Obama White House and co-chair for then President Obama's Council Advisors on Science and Technology. Science has been co-opted. It's been hijacked to the point now where that science is so thoroughly hijacking, it's hijacking our government, our legal systems on behalf of the greater socialist revolution at large, via, in many cases, through the world socialist and world socialism of human rights. Holdren is a noted left-wing activist on issues environmentalism, nuclear disarmament, energy policy, and the population control. He has been criticized as a neo-Malthusian for his severe stance on supposed global overpopulation and advocacy for population control policies. Holdren has served as an informal advisor to a number of left-leaning foundations and nonprofits such as the Rockefeller Foundation, the MacArthur Foundation, and the Energy Foundation. We got funding here. A little information on the funding. some of the different foundations and stuff that are involved in their funding. Rockefeller Foundation. You got the left-leaning David and Lucille Packard Foundations here. Larry Ellison. Howard Hughes Medical Institute. Rockefeller Foundation, Carnegie Foundation, the Joyce Foundation. The federal government is the largest identifiable source of funding for the AAAS. While these guys are undermining and infusing to deconstruct our country is its largest identifiable source of funding. It's where we are. Between 2008 and 2017, federal funding to the AAS averaged over $3.3 million annually. Data from the website USA Spending, managed by the office, $3.3 million annually. Data from the website USA Spending Management. It shows that AAS received $27.9 million in 451 contracts between 2004 and March 2018. Of this sum, the largest contracts were given to AAS by the Department of Health and Human Services, largely from a subsidiary agency, the National Institutes of Health, and the Department of Homeland Security. AAS received another $41.5 million in 25 grants between 2011 and December 2017, of which an overwhelming majority, $35.5 million, came from the National Science Foundation. This organization that is pushing to infuse and codify the world socialism of human rights into literally every pillar of our society. Right? Into our legal systems, into our public health systems. Public health, by definition, is a human rights. Anyways, but this is where we are. This is where we are. And this is just an observation, a closing observation. As has been established, the so-called MAHA, Rescue the Republic, medical freedom movements are not even authentically conservative or even right-wing movements, let alone pro-American as founded, pro-Constitution, pro-Republic, pro-individual liberty, or pro-actual freedom of any kind. As such, they are actually working in favor of the revolution against the whole of them. They're acting as agents of the revolutionary, as agents of the world socialism of human rights, as agents of the world socialist world collectivism, world socialism at large, if not in cause, at least in effect. I think a lot of them are doing it in cause. And Malholtr one of them, speaking right out. You've got Malone out there, it's disaster capitalism and his Psy-war. Espousing the anti-capitalism, Marxist anti-capitalism of, Naomi Klein, as Dr. James Thorpe, as Sasha Stones, Humanitad, with everybody rolled into that equation, from Jeffrey Sachs to who in the medical freedom movement hasn't been directly involved with that shit. That whole postmodern, actually anti-frickin' democracy altogether movement. An anarchist, a global anarchist movement. Essentially, by definition, he's against all governments, not just the United States government, but he's against all world governments. It's nuts. Since the switch has flipped onto a full-blown centrally planned collectivism by Trump with his Operation Warp Speed, and I don't see anything less coming out of that with this big, beautiful bill that just passed. Since the switch has flipped to a full-blown centrally planned collectivism in response to COVID, the collectivist socialist revolution in America and the world was and still is almost complete. That's what flipped the switch. Yet there were and still are pockets of resistance still burning brightly. A well-established tactic of extinguishing any such uncontrolled fires. This is an observation. The way I write this here, to get this, a well-established tactic of, we all know this, is extinguishing any such uncontrolled fires. Any real resistance, any uncontrolled resistance would be that they would against, revolutionary or anti-revolutionary or otherwise, is via setting their own controlled fires. So it's called backburning. When you have a forest fire, or you're fighting a forest fire of an area, what they'll do is they'll set a controlled fire to burn and suck the oxygen out, to burn the fuel, so that the uncontrolled fire has nothing through which to burn. I mean, it gets away on them once in a while, but it's a known tactic. Is this medical freedom movement, the way I see this medical freedom movement, is just one giant backburn? When they were going to flip the switch with this frickin' COVID thing, lock everybody down, they got to decide who was and who wasn't essential to society. What was and what wasn't essential to society. They forced us to lock down, close down our businesses' ability to be able to make a living, and then they forced us to purchase. They closed everybody down except for the public-private partners, except for the public-private partnership ring. Amazon, eBay, Walmart, right? But if you had any real pushback, authentic pushback back there against that individualism, against the actual supporting, and had a pushback in support of our actual founding principles, in support of our actual individual rights and liberty, that would be an uncontrolled fire. So if you want to set a frickin' backburn, this whole medical freedom movement has served as nothing more than a backburn on the revolution, to take the fuel and momentum out of any actual and real pushback that would come. It's right there. Social media has effectively worked wonders on behalf of central planning efforts to segregate the American public into multiple political, geographically, racially, and or ideologically conflicting, not to mention informationally siloed groups. And it's just basically controlled political backburning. All of it. And I got this Joe Rogan Experience and Suzanne Humphries. I just kind of wanted to touch on this really to close out and put that in there. They wrote this article. We know Cooey has actually done a couple study halls on her, just completely blowing the opportunity to do anything real. She was out there and she had the opportunity to say what she said before on these vaccines, but she failed at the world's biggest stage, as far as social media goes anyways. She is a colossal fail because she didn't push anything that she was once pushing about these vaccines or anything, right? So you got these people on here that got these doctors got together and they jumped on her as if she was, the pariah of pariahs. She was the uncontrollable of uncontrollable, of heresy and everything else. They were, one of the things that I wanted to point out is that she was said something about adjuvants on the vaccines, vaccine adjuvants, and one of the things that we've been hearing, the only things that we've been hearing about these vaccines is that they're not pushing back against vaccines. They're not pushing back necessarily against the vaccine, but an adjuvant. Adjuvant. They're pushing back against this adjuvant or that adjuvant. But it hit me when I was reading this down through this article. It's the same old shit, man. Why do I freaking reading this shit? Why am I reading this shit? And then I see this. I wanted to point this out. As science is committed to evidence-based medicine and public health, we feel that we have a professional obligation to expose and counter this dangerous misinformation that, this Suzanne Humphries was, supposedly espousing here, and all these doctors are all pissed off, right? Humphries employs vague, emotionally charged language about horrid things while providing zero scientific context. The Children's Hospital of Philadelphia's Vaccine Center explains that vaccine ingredients fall into specific categories with defined purposes. So while she was out there bitching about adjuvants, and everybody's bitching about all these adjuvants, this, that, and the other thing, I learned in this article that there's actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 aspects of a vaccine that adjuvants are only one aspect of 1 out of 5 aspects. So what are adjuvants? Substances that enhance immune response and ensure the correct type of response occurs. If you want to believe that shit. But anyways, adjuvants are just one aspect of multiple aspects. So if we're going to... If they're promoting a pushback, they're promoting a pushback on these vaccines based on adjuvants, any one adjuvant or multiple adjuvants, it doesn't matter, because they're not bringing up any of these other aspects of the vaccines. They're not bringing up the antigen aspects, the stabilizer aspects, the preservatives aspects, the manufacturing byproducts aspects. They're not rolling any of these other aspects into the argument, which leaves, okay, once this adjuvant is exhausted, once it's been exhausted, or if for some reason, somehow, you were able to defeat, come up with an argument that squashes the adjuvant argument, okay, then they have the stabilizers. They can start with the stabilizers. They can start with the antigens. They can start with the preservatives. They can start with the manufacturing. They create as many as 1,000, if not an unlimited number of hoops that you'd have to jump through to push back against these vaccines going this route. And it was epiphany. I was like, what? This is kind of an interesting epiphany for me to end on. Anyways, I kind of wanted to, I'll end it there, but gotta get Minnie P out, gotta take her out. It's kind of a beautiful day today. But I hope you got something out of it. I wanted to show you how science has been hijacked and the human rights aspect of things is being codified into literally everything. And I use that word literally as meaning literally everything. As far as, our whole of our society, the pillars of our society, the tenets, it's being codified into everything. And it's slowly but surely deconstructing what America is, our founding principles, our history, our individual rights and liberty secured in our Constitution. This is where we are. And today's July 4th. It's our Independence Day. And I just it's nothing new. I've been doing the same thing, but this is just a shine a light on another avenue through which they're pushing the tenets of world socialist revolution and codifying them into multiple aspects of our society, our legal system, our public health system, overarching global governance, public health laws with One Health. They're doing the same shit there. So I just wanted to get that, put this information out there for your consideration. Roll it in, take it into consideration. Maybe I don't know. It's information for your consideration. Happy Independence Day, America, and I hope that we have many more, and that we can wake up. My message here. This information. I'm not doing this in effort for the cult. The cult isn't gonna like this. Nobody in the cult's gonna like it. The message is for people that are trying to get out of the cult, or even better yet, avoid it altogether. So, with that, I look forward to seeing you in the next Liberty Perspective. Thank you. I'm Joe Marshall. Thank you.